Hope it's at the right volume. Still trying to get my settings adjusted. Welcome. Happy Saturday. I have. All right, let me turn this off. I hope your day's going like that. I have some things to do and lined up, talk about, play around with. One thing I want to try to do is figure out how to add a background, not a screen background, but when you're having let me see, news layout, like when you're having more than one person on the panel, you can have a background behind the individual videos, and I want to figure out how to do that. So maybe if I have a guest, they'll let me play around with that. I do want to experiment with some backgrounds as well. See, but I don't have a green screen, so it makes me look funky. But like this, but it would show my normal room, but the videos would overlay onto this when I have guests or I'm playing videos. So I've Googled, I don't really know what that's called or how to figure it out. It's not called a background because all the stuff on backgrounds relates to what I'm doing right now, like the brick wall, which I'm hitting, trying to find out how to do the background for the guest in the videos. Okay, how do I turn this off? None. There we go. Oh, and I can do a banner. Hang on, create banner. And I need to put the StreamYard link. Okay, sorry, I'm I guess I should have all this set up before I mash play. I mean live. Okay, where's my banner? Show. Look at there. Taking guests today. Click the pin link to join the call. And then what I do is I put the pin link in the comments. Go to YouTube and pin it. I'm sorry, y'all. I should have had all this did. I'm sorry, y'all. I should have had all this did. Ooh, hang on. Mute you. Pin. Why is it not pinning? Oh, because I'm not under my. Okay. Okay. Thank you all for being patient and bearing with me. This is how I learn how to do it differently next time. Okay. The link is pinned. It's in the comments. Patty P. Hey, I love Patty. She's one of the commenters in some of the other streams. Hey, Patty. I don't know if you want to come on, but you're welcome to. Just click the link. Otherwise, thanks for watching. I'm excited. You're like my first viewer today. So I had a bunch of stuff to kind of get into today, and I'm not sure what order I want to do it in. The thing that's mostly on my mind. Oh, and instead of doing Twitter, just like randomly going through Twitter, I've started bookmarking some tweets to kind of curate some things to talk about. And one of them came across my feed this morning. So let's just go to the bookmarks. Let's see what I got. All right, share. screen, bookmarks. This Sahil Bloom tweet. Um, Early in your career, I think the most important thing is that you build a reputation for reliability, figuring it out, which I call creative problem solving or just problem solving. Both are entirely free and don't require any luck or talent. Just show up, do the work, and get the job done. People will literally fight over you. Okay, that has not been my experience. In fact, I think I posted it. There must be other factors involved because these two alone have not worked much for me. If anything, these competencies are more likely to be threatening and intimidating than to be an asset, at least in my experience. I've talked before about being fired for being too creative, passionate, and intense, having coworkers say that I'm working at too high of a too high of a level, and I'm setting a higher bar or standard that they can work up to. So that's the kind of stuff I run into when I'm too good at what I do or too competent. He's saying that people are going to fight over you. I think there's other things involved in just this because I have reliability out the ass. I'm one of the most reliable people I know. I have a power of commitment. Is one of my superpowers that I wish other people had even half of. And I'm not even bragging. If I could clone myself, I could run one of the most effective, efficient companies out there. I show up on time. In fact, 5 minutes early is late to me. I have no problem showing up. I have no problem attending everything I say I'm going to do. I show up and do. I kept Zooms going on time every day. I was supposed to be there for a year, consistently for over a year. I put things on my calendar, and if it's on my calendar, I'm going to show up for you. You don't have to remind me. You don't have to confirm or anything. Like I can show up. I can be reliable. People can count on me to get things done. I'm really good at problem solving and figuring out solutions to different things. Tell me what you need done, and I have what's called a fluency of ideas. My brain will churn out idea after idea after idea after idea until the thing gets solved. So I don't have a stopping point. I'm gonna think of solutions until one of them works. So I have one and two. I have what he's talking about in this tweet. People are not fighting over me. So I think there's other things they want. And maybe reliability means reliably keeping up probably won't come. Okay, well, maybe in the future. I still want to. Who is TCPS? Oh, is that trad culture? Okay, I do want to talk to you because we were talking on Machine Live show. I'd love to finish our conversation. I want to get this one little thing out of the way because it ties into this Destiny clip when he was on debating with Andrew earlier this week that I want to tie it into and talk a little bit about this. And then, yes, please come on. Okay, where was I? The reliability thing. Maybe it means like reliably presenting a certain persona or personality or professionalism that communicates something to it's all about like how the outside world sees things and how you present to this invisible mass audience. So maybe like I'm not reliable for that. You can't count on me to know when to say like there's kind of a game you have to play in business and companies, and I don't know how to play the game. Like I'm really bad at saying the right thing at the right time. I'm really good at saying the true thing all the time, but that's not necessarily what people in charge always are relying on you to do. So, but as far as punctuality, attendance, competency, ability to get the job done, follow through, commitment, I have that form of reliability, and I have the ability to figure things out. So there's also this idea running around in the world, and it showed up there was this debate earlier this week on Playing with Fire, Alex's channel, and Andrew from the Crucible. And I was much, much more sympathetic to Andrew's position on this. Destiny voiced the idea that it started out that people with higher IQs or that are better educated, that people with college educations or white collar jobs have higher IQs than working class or blue collar people or are smarter than. I don't necessarily think that's true. And Andrew made the point that there's a lot of overlap between certain working class or blue collar jobs, if you want to call them that, and intelligence. And I find that to be true as well. But then Destiny took it a step further and said that not only are they smarter than, but higher income not only does but should coordinate with higher IQ. So the smarter you are, the more money you should make, and that should be that should be a direct correlation. Like your income should correlate with your intelligence. So I'm going to play the little clip of him um, being a smug little classist elitist, and then I want to talk about it a little bit. Okay, what am I doing? Sharing the screen. YouTube. Here we go. It's so just enjoy it for yourself, and then I'll talk about it.
Yeah, definitely. By the way, some of the wealthiest people I know, most successful, work in sales, and some of them are not very high IQ. So we don't need to necessarily put like how much money you make directly in correlation with IQ. But
yes, wait. No. We should, though. That's not fair to say, right? That's like saying, I think Andrew brought it up earlier, Zuckerberg dropped out of college. The average college dropout is not earning $50 billion a year.
Sure.
IQ and income in the United States and across all of the Western world
generally correlate.
No, not generally. They're highly correlated. They're ultra highly correlated.
You brought up Zuckerberg as an example of somebody who was highly educated making money.
That's not because he is highly educated. He just didn't do it the conventional way.
Anyway, that's the gist of it. You'll notice how passionate and intense he was about the correlation between IQ and income. I have a high IQ. I'm in Mensa. I went to a gifted school growing up. It has not translated into a higher income, and neither has those qualities in Sahil's tweet, reliability and problem solving, translate into a higher income either. My siblings who have a lower IQ than me are much, much more successful. Few of them have bachelor degrees. One of them doesn't even have that. Way more money than me. They have a social intelligence. They have a practical intelligence. Some of them have a mechanical intelligence that I don't have. So I don't think IQ, the score you get on an intelligence test, necessarily guarantees you or should even guarantee you any kind of higher income. And so to me, that's elitism, that's classism, that's destiny thinking that the smart people should have more, make more. And I don't want to assume managerialism in him, but that they should be making the decisions for the rest of us either. But there was something about that whole debate that really turned me off of Destiny in his, to me, what was an obvious bias against the working class. It felt like the lower class to him. And as somebody with a high IQ, I completely reject what he's saying. And I think people that do the work, that can produce results, should get rewarded financially in proportion to the merit of the results they produce. I don't think the score you get on an IQ test or the type of college degree you have has anything to do with it. I think it should be tested in the field, in the ring, and the outcomes and results you produce is what should determine your merit. And so I wanted to get off on that rant for a little while. Okay, I'm going to talk to Trad Culture if he's ready. We were talking about on machine lies thing, kind of epistemology and how do you know something's true? So if you're there.
Hello.
How's it going? Hey, how are you? I don't know what to call you. Trad? Is that okay? Trad Culture?
Yeah, you can call me that, I suppose.
Okay. Well, welcome. And I also need to figure out how to get this volume adjusted because you're very loud on my end.
Oh, am I?
Yeah. But then when I turn you lower, you're going to show up low on the stream. So I might just have to leave you loud.
I see.
So anyway, what's up?
Not a whole lot. I'm thinking I might be on the Machine Lies tonight if he'll have me.
Oh, is he streaming? I might.
I believe so. He was on my stream last night, so I figure I might as well repay the favor.
I must not follow your channel then, so because I didn't see it on my list. So let me correct that right now. What's yours called?
Traditional Culture Preservation Society.
All right. Yeah, I remember talking on the last stream he did about before we. That was a difficult stream to get to for reasons beyond either of our control. But it was about consciousness and how you know things and revelation and kind of the physical world. Use the analogy of living in a simulation and founding knowledge on that. And I did say I wanted to continue the conversation at some point, but we could talk about whatever's on your mind today, really.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, I am subscribed. I didn't see the stream.
Oh, interesting. I guess YouTube's not a fan of.
It could be me. It could be my attention span just went past it.
Yeah, it's possible. But on the other hand, I've had numerous people tell me that they didn't notice that, like, I'd make a comment on one of their videos and they wouldn't see it for a week or something. So I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not sure I noticed that either. Sorry.
Oh, it is what it is. Now, yeah, I don't know. I think it's fascinating, like your own, and I've seen a little bit of what you had to say. I think you had a like a debate or an interview or something on the Crucible that I think got taken down that I saw part of once. It just sounds like
on gay marriage.
Was that what? I don't even remember what it was on.
I think it's the only one I did with Andrew, and it's on Rumble and BitChute, I believe, but it did get taken off of the Crucible site.
I see. I don't know.
And it's still up on PF Jung's channel too. He has a copy of it.
Oh, really? Okay. No, I just thought I thought it was a really, like, you have a really fascinating perspective. I guess I'd say, because you're sort of, from what I can tell, you're sort of like into the men's movement, right? The 90s thing with like men going out and trying to rediscover themselves. And I'm too young to have really been around for that, but I sort of feel like the ideas that the men's movement represents are really valuable ideas just for society in general. They're really trying to connect to our tribal past, and that's something I'm all about with my own channel, is, understanding the fact that really we've lost something as a modern culture that traditional cultures had.
Related to gender.
Yeah, like specifically like related to like there is this crisis of masculinity. And of course, this is what people like Jordan Peterson talk about. And this is really like, but to some extent you could say in a maladaptive way, this is what like the red pill is, Fresh and Fit and Andrew Tate. That's what that's all about. It's about attempting to create something in place of what's been lost. Like this sort of like tribal male solidarity value system. And from what I understand of the 1990s men's movement, it was trying to rediscover that. It was trying to rekindle for like, middle class, bourgeois, really like socially isolated men that needed some sort of meaningful connection to the solidarity networks of the past that would have been provided by the warrior band of like the Native American tribes or the Papua New Guinean people or something like that. It was an attempt to try and recreate it. And then it just fizzled out and died, I guess, because individualism just went in and just completely like a crashing wave obliterated it.
It's still out there. I'm part of the Mankind Project, which is kind of the new version of it. But it actually started out of the feminist movement. The guys who started it would attend some of the feminist conferences and conventions and weekends, and they wanted something similar for men. So I think it is to create that connection between other men, but it took its inspiration from seeing those connections being created among women in the feminist movement. And it's definitely changed. I did their New Warrior Training Weekend back in July, and that's kind of the initiatory weekend that gets you into the movement and takes you through a simulation of the hero's journey. And I don't want to talk too negatively, but I have noticed a difference between the modern men's movement and when I was involved with it in the 90s. There is definitely something that's more feminized about it, I would say, than what I think the men were looking for back when I was at it in the night, which is more closer to what you described.
So is it more like, oh, I'm sorry to interrupt.
No,
is it more like Jordan Peterson-y? Because that's the sense I get.
the two features that I noticed that stood out right away are kind of three really that were different than my initial involvement in it. Was this obsession with safetyism, and they're not talking about physical safety because I can understand physical safety, but a lot of this takes place online, on Zooms and online meetings and calls. It's psychological or emotional safetyism, which I don't understand what the danger is on a Zoom. Like, no one's going to get physically hurt. No one's going to punch you through a Zoom screen. Your physical safety is not in jeopardy, but they're obsessed with keeping it psychologically and emotionally safe. And to the point where if anybody, and these are grown men, doesn't feel safe on a call, they can call safety and then the discussion stops, and they can call it for anything. So once you give people the power to kind of redefine harm and what safety is, they're going to use it. And we see the woke use it. We see feminists and women use it all the time. But if you give that power, that same power to men, they're going to use it as well.
So it's basically like, oh, I'm sorry to interrupt again.
Go ahead, but I'll just give an example. I've seen safety called for things like men having opinions, sharing opinions, and someone not believing that we should be sharing opinion. We should only be talking about our feelings and not giving opinions. So that made them feel unsafe. Things like just informal conversation where men are kind of just chatting and not following the talking stick format where it's one person talking at a time. They call it interjecting. So even little things like that can trigger this sense of, oh, I don't feel safe anymore. And that's exactly what one of my criticisms about wokeness and the social justice movement is they're over concerned for safety and the expansion of the concept of safety to encompass almost everything and anything. So it gives them this certain power to manipulate situations and events by crying safety. And so I see that happening now in the men's movement as well. So that's one of the things I noticed, but I want to let you.
Would you say that, because it sounds, based on what you're describing, like it's almost become like an anti-masculinity movement? Then it's like trying to break down, separate men from like masculinity. Then it's saying like, well, men should basically become a bunch of snowflakes.
I don't know if it's saying they should be, but they definitely, it is definitely producing snowflakes by having this ethos of safety. And my impression of it was, where are the grown ass men that can sit on a call and not have that can manage their own safety? Because I run groups as well, and I run men's calls and Zooms. On my groups, if you feel safe for whatever reason, you can leave the call. You can take a break. You can turn your camera off. Sometimes we have breakout rooms. You can go. There's so many things you can do where the locus of the responsibility for your safety stays with you, an internal locus, and the whole group doesn't. You don't have to impact the conversation with your personal safety needs. And people can call safety like just sharing an opinion, like maybe the opinion you have about gender roles. Somebody could call safety on that, and then the whole conversation would stop. So I'm looking for the grown men that can manage their reactions to whatever they're hearing, and they can have opinions and not feel like they're dangerous to share. They can manage their own conversation between each other and not have to have it micromanaged. And my impression on these calls was, where are the men? Where are the grown men? Because this seems like, when I went on the weekend, it felt like kindergarten class. It felt like being back in grade school. Everything was so micromanaged and like, you know how in school you have to walk with your finger. Everybody has to walk in a line with their finger on their lips and stuff like that. It was that kind of stuff. And I'm thinking, how is this going to initiate men into masculinity or adulthood? It feels like a step in the opposite direction. I feel like I'm being taken back to grade school. And so it's that, like, if the goal is one thing, their method for achieving that goal seems completely opposite from the methods I would use to achieve the same goal. If it's to produce like autonomous, individualized, self-determining men that can stand on their own 2 feet and manage situations from an internal locus of control.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, and that's unfortunately that's not super surprising because that seems like that's to a large extent is the way that the culture's just gone in general. Um, Certainly, it doesn't seem like, and it seems as though really, 20 something years on, 30 years on from like the height of the men's movement in the 90s, it doesn't seem like really the larger impact of the culture has been, positive in really any regard for men, because now it seems like what we're seeing right now is that the role models for young men now increasingly are, just irresponsible jackasses like Andrew Tate. Like that's become that's become the modern sort of attempt at like rediscovering masculinity, is that it's like this faux projected masculinity that with these like manosphere people that quite frankly I don't know about you, I can't stand any of them.
I never did like Andrew Tate until I saw his recent interview with his therapist, and then I see him as more like complex and three-dimensional now. But what are we giving them as an alternative? Because the Andrew Tates are filling a vacuum now that's not being filled with a healthier alternative. So they either have that or they have the type of men I'm talking about, like the overly safetyist kind of feminized men. And so where like where are the role models currently for traditional masculinity? And masculinity is definitely, you mentioned earlier, like men needing this. Part of the reason they need it is masculinity is definitely under attack, like more under attack than it's been in the past, at least in my lifetime. And so that's gonna generate a defensiveness and kind of a entrenchment in a tough macho traditional masculinity to counter that sense of being stigmatized or demonized like they are currently in today's society. So I think the androphobia, the misandry that men are currently experiencing in society is going to create like this counter reaction of hypermasculinity, but a defensive type. And so where are the healthy models?
Well, that's the problem, is that, because I mean, I've seen many healthy models of relations between men and women over the course of my study of anthropology. But I think the issue really lies with just the West, because I think the West has struggled for hundreds of years to figure this stuff out. That what we see essentially is that the reversion back to the machismo of the fresh and fit and the Andrew Tate, what that is that's a reversion to a tried and true, albeit maladaptive model, because that's really all that the West has ever known. That's all that the West knows, is either you could be the soyified, beta male, bourgeois, like soft IT worker, whatever, like that sort of guy, the Silicon Valley type dude, or else you could be like the traditional, blue collar, ultra macho, like, but neither one of those are any good. Like neither one of those are actually an adaptive way to live, and that's harmful to men, and it's harmful to women, it's harmful to society in general, it's harmful to children. It's just, we're caught in this dialectic. It's like so many other dialectics that we're caught in. It's just it's a false dialectic, and it's one that you don't see replicated across human societies. You see many societies in the world that don't have this problem, that don't have this crisis in masculinity, that have never had this crisis in masculinity. You go to a lot of hill tribes, Tibeto-Burman hill tribes in like Northeast India and Tibet and Nepal and Bhutan, places like that. Like none of them have these problems. And you notice when you look and you see the way that children are raised, and the way that, like, there's relatively flexible gender roles in these shifting cultivation horticultural communities, and the way that children are raised by both parents, and there's not really any like inculcation of animosity between the sexes. Boys and girls play with each other from a young age, and there's not like awkwardness around sex the way that there has traditionally been in our society. It's just a superior model, even if it's more quote unquote primitive.
Do you think there's value at all in the machismo type of masculinity? And do you think the models you're talking about are viable in our high-tech modern society because they seem to be adapted to more agrarian lifestyles. And so is there a version of masculinity today that is adapted to society, like the society not only as it exists today, but where it's going? The high tech, we have AI coming, cyber, digital world.
Well, the problem that we have right now is that to an increasing extent, it's questionable whether human beings can adapt to the technology that surrounds them. I mean, this is
much
one
less
of the
individual genders,
and that's the thing. Like it's not just like a men and women thing. It's like, is humanity going to be able to survive this? And I mean, this is one of my big things. If you watch any of my videos, I'm very doom and gloom about the future of just like the world in general. I don't think that. I think that's a very problematic situation just in general that we're finding ourselves in. And although there is, maybe a chance that a blue moon sort of chance that, this transition can all happen smoothly and we can actually like evolve into this better version, like we can have this better tomorrow, like so many people are sort of predicting. I think that much more likely is just that this is going to lead to some sort of chaotic situation and eventually a collapse of our society.
What would that collapse look like?
It's actually been to a large degree quantified. There are books out there that are sort of showing from computer models just what a societal collapse, that the sort of societal collapse that we go through would look like. And it would run one of two ways. It would run based on how societies have collapsed in the past, and civilizations have always collapsed in some form. There's always been, booms and busts, cycles, dark ages, and things like that. It could be either a slow and gradual collapse based on just like falling IQ, which is being promoted based by technology. Oddly enough, technology has the seeds of its own destruction because as technology is advanced, people are under weaker and weaker selection pressures, which means that there's less and less of a need to become intelligent enough to solve complex problems the way we would have had to in the past to survive. So now we have people that are increasingly self-insufficient and aren't able to really, they don't have the brain power to continue to operate at sophistication. So there's this mismatch that's inherently going to end up really crushing the system as people become lower in intelligence and the system demands higher and higher amounts of intelligence. So it could be just a slowly things start moving backwards. And at the same time, there starts being more internal conflict and violence. And I think we are seeing the fracturing, certainly in America, we're seeing the fracturing of society based on political polarization and things like that. Or else, I mean, that's the nicer of the two alternatives. The other alternative is there could be some sort of like super whatever event that could happen. Like something could just fail one day and people are so self-insufficient that the failure could lead to extinction of most of the world's population. Like that if we get to a certain level of, idiocracy where people are completely incapable of taking care of themselves and they need AI to take care of them. And all of a sudden, there's just like a week or something when like the AI grid goes out, that could be the situation we could never recover from. It could be something, it could be as destructive as like a nuclear holocaust, which of course that's another option too, is what if there keeps on being, more and more people are more and more pushed towards the brink of war. Right now we have a lot of problems going on in the world with Russia, with China. And increasingly also because people are getting dumber, that includes leaders are becoming less and less competent. I mean, I think that our own president is an example of that. We're having less and less just competent leadership across the board, and that can only be expected to become a greater problem with time. And you can predict 20 years from now, the sorts of leaders that are coming up are going to be even a lot more stupid and crazy than Joe Biden, Vladimir Putin, Xi Jinping. The already stupid and incompetent leaders that we have right now are likely going to be the cream of the crop compared to what we're going to get 20 years from now. So we really, I don't see much of a white pill situation that could possibly come out of this.
Are people getting dumber? I don't know what the numbers are. Or
For a while, there was something called the Flynn effect, which was basically people appeared to up until like the early 2000s for like most of the 20th century, people appeared to be scoring better on IQ tests from the beginning of the 20th century till the end of the 20th century. And that this was called the Flynn effect because it was and it was seen as being like, oh no, actually you don't need to worry about like dysgenic fertility and things like that because essentially social learning and higher educations were causing a situation where people's overall intelligence was still increasing for quite a while. Of course, now their general factor of intelligence, which is called G in the social sciences, was going down. So people have, in terms of their native inborn hereditary intelligence, that's been in the decline since like the late 19th century. However, for most of the 20th century, the institutions were still working and operating in such a way that the non-hereditary aspects of intelligence were causing the overall factor of intelligence to go up. However, what happened is that eventually, because of the fact that the hereditary factors in intelligence were declining so fast that by the end of the 20th century and the beginning of the 21st century, that even started affecting the quality of the education system. And now we have what's called the anti-Flynn effect, where on every measure, intelligence is going down and the hereditary aspects are going down especially quickly. But now even the environmental aspects of intelligence are going down. And it's highly unlikely that we could bounce back from this situation short of some sort of a large-scale societal collapse that would, bring us back into a dark ages that maybe we could rise again out of those dark ages.
so there's two factors involved. There's the hereditary factor, which how do you improve that? And then the cultural factors or the non-hereditary factors would be nurture, education, and that seems to be able to compensate for the lower hereditary rates. At least it has.
That's only true temporarily, though, because the problem is that even the cultural factors are dependent on there being enough people who have, a natively high intelligence to be able to build a culture and a high quality education system that can overcome that. And the problem is that once you have 150 or so years, which is what we've got, it's been about 150 years since the general factor of intelligence, the hereditary aspect was on the increase. And now that's being reflected in the fact that like there's less and less that the system can even do to help people out. Like the average college professor now has about the intelligence level of the average like elementary school teacher 100 years ago. And that's going to be reflected in the fact that, college, the standards of universities are going to go down if that's the case.
They already are. You're blackpilling me now. I watched a lecture the other day from a professor. And it was like class on literature or something. And I was catching all the little errors he was making. And this was an older guy, even older than me. And I was catching all the errors he was making. And then at some point he mentioned that was a fourth level class, which I'm assuming is senior level. And I'm thinking that's an advanced class. I could teach a class better than he's doing. And if that's the standard out there, then I'm getting just as blackpilled. Like I've noticed that myself. I used to be in the school system and I saw it firsthand and it just got worse and worse.
Well, certainly.
So I don't know what you do if nature's not providing us with the raw intellect we need, and our systems are not developing that, because you need a certain level of intellect to maintain society, and then you need a certain level to compete and progress and advance society. So we need at least enough to maintain society at a sustainable level, so that it doesn't regress or collapse.
Mm.
And if nature's not providing that, and our nurture's not addressing where nature can't, then
Well, I think that's
we need
why there's
solutions.
investment in AI now is because there's a sense from, you know, a lot of the people that are at the top that we are heading towards a really troublesome situation, and that the hope, I think, is that like AI is sort of their Hail Mary pass to try and keep
Make you
this from
nervous.
happening. It's like, oh, like, well, maybe if we just invest enough in having an artificial intelligence that we don't need to have the human intelligence that's rapidly declining.
I don't think AI is going to. I think there's a specific type of intelligence that humans have that they're good at, like a creative type of intelligence. I don't think an AI is going to replace or be able to replicate.
Yeah, I don't think so either. I think that we are probably most likely living in the winter of civilization, if we're being honest, and that is a mixed bag itself. I mean, that's not necessarily like, oh, just total doom and gloom, lose hope and despair. There are mixed, you know, there are blessings to the collapse of a civilization as well. There's certainly my own personal perspective. I'm kind of a hypocritical Luddite in that I use modern technology, but I don't think that we as humans are better off living with the level of sophistication that we have right now. I think that this actually places us in an evolutionary mismatch, and that we'd probably, for the sake of the psychological functioning of the human race, it honestly would probably be a net positive if we could go back to more of like a peasant or even a hunter-gatherer sort of life.
You think that's realistic?
I think that something along those lines is likely to happen within the next couple hundred years, because that sort of thing has happened before. You know, you see all the time advanced urbanized states collapse back to basically medieval ways, or even pre-medieval ways of living. Like you look at over and over again, the Middle Ages itself was an example of this. You know, the urbanized and modernized Roman Empire became the barbarian society of the early Middle Ages, the Dark Ages, and you saw very similar things happening in various parts of like the Americas after the collapse of the classic Maya states. You got like a more medieval warring chieftain style Mayan culture. You saw this with the Chinese at various points in their history. There'd be a Chinese dynasty that was relatively advanced, and then it would collapse into, there's an entire period of several hundred years in Chinese history called the Warring States period, where it's basically like a feudal society after having been for a while before then a very advanced urbanized society. And this sort of stuff, this stuff just simply happens fairly regularly throughout history. And I fail to see any reason why it would not continue today.
So in that case, it's just part of a cyclical process. But the only major difference I see being the technology, that the advancement of it's happening within a technology that it's never happened in before. I watch a lot of what if Altist videos, and he's kind of along the same lines with the doomerism.
Mm-hmm.
And civilizations scale up to a point and reach a point of decadence where they start to collapse on themselves.
And
once they solve the material problems and there's nothing left to engage them materially, then they start to get into cultural, like kind of like all the cultural rabbit holes we see now, the first world problems and the luxury beliefs, and then it starts to have a trickle down effect on the rest of the civilization, and it begins to decay from within.
Yeah, I think that's essentially what we're seeing right now. Like we're seeing people that are, and we're seeing, because it's not even like, you know, all of our material problems have been solved, but what it is that our material problems have been solved and then some for a large section of the society, because we still have very serious poverty in our society. But the problem is that like we have this tremendous gap, and this also happens if you have ever read the works of Pasha Glubb, who is a great British historian who basically talked about, he wrote a book called The Fate of Empires and the Search for Survival, which is all about, like, he analyzed actual examples in history of rises and falls of civilizations. And he found that the same pattern always applied. And one of the big things that he highlighted always happens is that it's not like there's ever actually a time when we just create a society of plenty for everyone. I mean, our society is not actually a society of plenty for everyone, because there's a huge gap between the rich and the poor. And to the extent that it's a global economy, there's an even huger gap, because, we have basically the poor, oppressed people of Africa and places like that are essentially part of the global economy, but they're at the bottom of the global economy and they're all starving to death, while the people in the first world nations get fat off their labor. And this situation, though, this always happens at the most decadent stage right before the civilization falls, is that you end up with a large, incredibly leisurely, incredibly decadent class of people that are living with way beyond their means. And they're the ones that have the luxury beliefs, and they're the ones that get into all the frivolity and all the decadence that they then try to force onto everybody else, including like the masses that are, in grinding poverty and starvation. You saw this with the Romans. You saw this with medieval Baghdad before the Mongols invaded. You saw this with various, like, at times in the history of China, the Sung dynasty shortly before it collapsed and the Mongols invaded. You've seen this pattern happening over and over again. It's always the same way. It's always like this totally decadent, degenerate elite that their ideas are trickling down to the masses now, and they're being enforced on the masses the same way that we're seeing a lot of the like woke trans stuff now being enforced on third world nations against their leaders' will. And they're literally now they're saying in Africa, we're going to cut off food shipments and basically commit genocide for the sake of trans rights, which there's literally people out there that are saying that now, like, or they're saying we should do that. They're saying like, if this country that depends on us for food aid doesn't go along with our like trans agenda, we're going to cut off the food supply. And basically it's like, we're going to kill masses of black children in order to like virtue signal about trans stuff.
That's extortion. Well, the trans are more oppressed now, so I think the black people have moved up the pyramid.
Yeah, that's the way it is, though, because like whatever the current virtue signally like zeitgeist is, it's like you throw out the old back in the 80s it was like helping the Ethiopian kids. Now the Ethiopian kids are a bunch of like transphobic jerks, so we need to show them who's boss.
Well, it's either a circle or a spiral. I mean, it's either an impersonal historical process that's just going to play itself out like it always have, or we've made progress and advanced, and it will be different, a little different this time, and allow us to move on to have a different outcome.
I mean, obviously, it's never just a complete cycle. There's always an extent to which, perhaps, I mean, unless you have this perspective that like there was some Atlantean thing going on in the past where like we were super advanced, which I don't know. I mean, I'm open to the idea that might be true, but like unless you have that perspective, generally speaking, what we have seen in history is that like even after a collapse, there's still some degree of there's still some level to which we've advanced. Like there's still some level that like the Germanic Dark Ages after the fall of the Roman Empire people were operating at a lower technological level than they were during the height of the Roman Empire, but they were operating at a higher technological level than they were during like the Greek Dark Ages of Homer's time. You know what I mean? Like it was that there still is this idea that like the tech is not 100% forgotten, but it becomes, I think that there have been many times in history where it goes backward, and where specifically what technological advancement we do have is just concentrated in certain areas, among certain groups. This is I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Edward Dutton, but he wrote a book called The Past is a Future Country. And he talks about this, and he talks about this coming collapse and how it's possible, it's very likely that there will be certain like refugia of civilization, certain like small areas similar to what happened in Byzantium with the Roman Empire fell, but like in and around Constantinople, there was still a high degree of civilization, both technological and artistic, that was maintained into the Middle Ages, and that sort of thing is likely to happen in individual small pockets, but that those individual small pockets are not going to be reflective of the much larger society, which will just go to the dogs.
Yeah, like the monasteries were too. If somebody buys your vision, what are things they can do right now, like practical things they can do in their lives to prepare or help turn it around, or
I would say
improve
that
it
the number
somewhat?
one, from a self-preservation perspective, the number one thing would be to try and figure out, see if you can predict where the refuge of civilization might be, and then go there. Like, now that'll involve a certain gamble, because you won't actually know. It's, I don't know how many
You talking about a
people,
physical location, like
yeah,
find where to migrate to?
yeah, like a lot, and this is why a lot of people get into homesteading, is because they're thinking, hey, maybe like if I go to an area like, rural Arkansas or someplace like that, where, like not where people are still relatively self-sufficient, where you get a lot of people that are farmers and like would know how to survive if things went south. And then on top of that, it's relatively like less connected to the decadence anyway. And this is why you see a lot of people now, there's been this huge like prepper culture and this huge like homesteader culture, because there are people that are trying to do this, there are people that are aware that this is going on, and they're trying to, with varying degrees of success, form communities that are trying to frustrate this process, which interestingly you also see in like the Western society during the like end of the Roman Empire and the beginning of the Middle Ages. It's not like, oh, nobody predicted that Rome was going to fall. Like tons of people realized Rome was going to fall when it fell, and a lot of people had prepared ahead of time, and they ended up actually, to some extent, making bank when the whole situation fell apart, because many of these people, if they had if they had prepared and they had invested in weapons, particularly, they could become like the protectors of the people that hadn't prepared. And that's where you got the feudal system. That's where you got the nobility and the serfs from, is that the serfs basically were the people that they were the descendants of the dummies that had, lived fat and happy and hadn't prepared for the collapse. And then the people that had prepared for the collapse, they became the nobility that, had invested in land and weapons ahead of time. And we're now, okay, well, now we're going to willingly protect you, the dummies, in exchange for now you have to serve us and like grow our food, basically.
So it seems like they're reverting to a earlier level of like, they're reverting to the level that the collapse might take us to anyway, but it's only in preparation to rise after the collapse actually happens.
Yeah, I mean, that's the idea. If you talk to these people, I've had conversations with like homesteading people and stuff, like living in, various parts of the Rocky Mountains and the Ozarks and things like that, and they'll tell you, that like, yeah, like we understand, like we're not necessarily thinking like, oh, this is just going to become like a total, Luddite caveman sort of thing. What we're seeing is that as the cities really sort of fall apart, and I think that the cities in America are already really unraveling. This is where the future lies. It's to the extent that there's going to be a future empire, a future to our empire, to the American empire, or a future even to like the West as we know it at all. It's going to have to come from the boondocks, right? It's going to have to come from the most primitive, like most outward area. Again, like, looking at the Western Middle Ages, during the darkest part of the Dark Ages, the only bit of Western civilization, unless you want to count Byzantium, which is sort of like West and East mixed, but like the only really like Western place, the only place in Western Europe that really avoided this collapse was Ireland, because Ireland had been the most like on the outskirts. It was never, directly conquered by the Roman Empire. It was very much on the outskirts of the culture complex that had collapsed. And as a result, it was the place which didn't get affected by the cultural complex that collapsed. And as a result, it was where all the leaders came and basically revived Western civilization. It was the Irish monks who came to France and came to England and came to Italy, and they were the ones that revived the West culturally during the darkest part of the Dark Ages.
Do they have internet out in these homesteads like Rocky Mountain? I'm wondering if it could be a digital location or virtual location instead of a physical one, at least when it comes to preserving cultural values and artistic and intellectual values. If you would need to
but even then,
or if you could create islands that are virtual where they could be accessed by anyone anywhere.
That would it could be, but even then, I would say there's issues with relying on having it be like, oh, well, you could just be anywhere and it could just be like a digital revolution. And it's that, even if the internet continues to exist, which I think that the internet in some form will continue to exist, but as the society collapses, one thing that's going to happen is that it's going to become more and more, similar to feudalism, including more and more authoritarian. So what you're going to see instead of having a somewhat democratic-ish society like the one that we live in, what we're going to see is increasingly more of like an autocratic society where something like the internet, to the extent it still exists at all, is going to be very much like a commodity that's monopolized by power structures, whatever they are, and that it's going to become increasingly difficult to have communication across, from one place to another with the internet technology that will become increasingly restricted. I think that the censorship that we're seeing now is really just like the first stage. It was likely to become more and more, a more and more restricted internet as the society in general breaks down into little authoritarian polities, which is what always happens when civilization falls. When that sort of thing happens, we're not likely, although we may see a form of the internet survive, we're not likely to see it in such a way that it's going to be very useful or helpful to very many people.
So don't depend on it.
Yeah, that's my personal perspective. And by the way, there are people that are like into the whole prepper homesteader thing that are like extremely active online and are completely don't at all think that that's going to happen. But I'm not as hopeful, I guess, as they are.
There's got to be alternative. It seems like there'd be alternatives out there. Like people could create an alternative that doesn't fall under this authoritarian internet. If that's like you're saying the internet's going to be centralized, but there's got to be these independent, decentralized.
No, I'm actually saying that the internet's going to be decentralized, and that's going to be one of the things that makes things more difficult. Is that as it becomes decentralized, it'll become more and more. Like everything. I mean, everything becomes decentralized in a post-imperial feudal system. That what we see is that, and that as a result, contact between people over long distances just goes away. And that if we do have a decentralized internet that's largely manipulated by like authoritarians or something like that, and we do see maybe in this one or two little refuge of civilization that doesn't happen. Well, the reality is though that outside that refuge of civilization, if you don't live there, you're likely to not be able to connect with the people that do live there. It's just like, nowadays it's extraordinarily difficult to talk to people that live in China because the Chinese internet is so heavily censored and restricted.
Would there be phones, or would communication be limited to your immediate community?
Again, I suspect that most likely every aspect of technology that we have today will continue to exist, but it will be something that it'll be just like how it was in these civilizations that have fallen in the past, where, although occasionally people forget how to do things, more often what happens is that this stuff continues, but it's like, instead of being where, 80% of the population or whatever gets this, is like 1% of the population does, like it's like the stuff still exists, is never completely forgotten, but it's no longer a reality for most people.
So, like, not necessarily become a prepper homesteader, but start thinking and be mindful of location if this happens, and then what are some other steps that people could take?
I mean, I would say start figuring out some degree of self-sufficiency, and this is something that I'm not terribly good at either. I worked for much of my life in like manual labor occupations. I was a lumberjack actually for quite a while, but I don't know.
Cool.
I don't grow I've never grown my own food, so I don't know. Like I'm still in the early stages of figuring out homesteading myself, but I would say really what one ought to do is one ought to be prepared for the possibility that you may have to know some skills that you don't currently know, and perhaps even more importantly, be prepared for like physically for having some land somewhere out there, even if you can't live in a rural community yourself long term, you can at least like get some sort of land deal somewhere, especially if somewhere where land is cheap, like North Dakota or something like that. And really like it's something productive. So that worst case scenario, even if you don't develop the skills yourself, if like, people that do, and if you live in a small town or something like that, where everybody knows each other and they're willing to help out, or perhaps, absolute worst case scenario, you, have to become a serf or something like that. Like, I'm not saying that would necessarily happen overnight. I think I think that it's very likely that we'll be dead when the system is at the level I'm talking about. But I think we are headed towards, within the next century or so, we are headed towards this sort of thing I'm referring to. And when that comes, whenever that comes, and whenever we think that we're really there, or we're about to be there, then just like be prepared for the possibility that you'll need to know how to get down and dirty and be a peasant. And that may take some time and you may have to get some training, but the one place I would definitely never be if something like this were to happen would be like a city. Certainly. Like if one is convinced that the end is nearer than maybe, a century or so, then living in a city, I think would just be a terrible idea in general.
Yeah, I watched Seattle degrade in front of my eyes, and I got out a couple of years ago to a more mid-sized city or smaller city, and it's much better. Like even the smaller cities, they're not that bad. So I don't know that you'd have to go out into the mountains, but definitely I think finding a way to live outside of a city but still within civilization could be a solution for many people.
Yeah, again, I think that like, and even within like, because you could get to a smaller town or something.
What's
like that.
happening in the big cities now, especially the blue cities, have not reached the smaller cities yet, or even the towns. So I don't think it's like city or wilderness. I think there's a range of options between those two that could still work for a lot of people, at least currently.
Yeah. Well, again, I think that this is a slow process. So right now, I don't, because I mean, I myself, I live in a pretty small town, but it's close-ish to a metropolitan area. I don't live, in the middle of the Rocky Mountains or something like that. But what I'd say is that I'm really glad that I live as much in the countryside as I do. Like I have I can walk 5 minutes down the road and it's pure farm country, which to me, like that's a positive thing, because you really need, if you are going to live in a medium-sized city, I would say, you might want to pick the outskirts of the city that are closer to the countryside, so that you have, and really more importantly, even than geographical location, might just be networking, know people that do have like the ability to operate, farm equipment or something like that, or do have these skills, and build up those networks. Because really, I mean, that's how people survived when various other empires fell, was that maybe, they didn't necessarily they didn't remember how to do all the farming stuff themselves, but they were good at networking, and they knew a lot of people that did, and they had those relationships, and they were able to they probably had to become serfs, but they were able to survive nonetheless.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too. It seems to come down to network, not necessarily going out into the wilderness, but positioning yourself within a network that has the tools and know-how and ability to survive this.
Yeah, certainly. Well, even the people that I know that are homesteaders, it's like they're doing it communally. They're going to like the people I'm talking about. They're going to the Arkansas Ozarks. It's like they're going to Arkansas and they're basically integrating themselves into these like little mountain towns, and they'll and they're basically, and they'll tell you. I mean, because I don't know if you've ever been out to Arkansas before, but it's really, I would say, perhaps in my own experience, I've only been there like once or twice, but in my own experience, it's very much, it's maybe the most traditional American state, because I just remember very distinctly the experience I had there was I was in a little town in the Ozarks with a bunch of friends of mine from college, and we were like riding. We were doing a road trip. We went to Colorado for skiing, and then on our way back, we hit a flat tire in the middle of nowhere in the Ozarks, and like the entire town came out to help us. And this was not that many years ago. This was like 2012. So that sort of communal spirit was still alive at that time. And I think that sort of thing, like that's a lot of what these people, that's why they're going to these smaller towns, is not so much, although it's partly, obviously, largely because these small towns have more of the capability to be self-sufficient because they're surrounded by wilderness. But just as important is the fact that these small towns tend to be so well integrated that, to a large extent, that's going to be really the difference between the person that would survive a collapse and the person that wouldn't, is their social network. It's the difference between, even emotionally within our own world, whether we survive a collapse of an existential collapse within our minds, right? Like the people, study after study has been done showing that if you live in like a little sort of peasant community or something like that, and you can go through all sorts of like traumatic life events and you'll actually cope extremely well. There's studies that are done of like people living in like Gaelic speaking people living in islands off the coast of Scotland, that finds that like there could be all sorts of family tragedies. They could lose a child or something like that, and yet almost none of them would end up suffering from major depression afterwards because they had such an integrated kinship network, versus people living in our society that have relatively less traumatic events than, a peasant culture in Scotland might have, but they actually cope much worse with the little traumas that they do have because they don't have these networks. Because networking for social animals like humans is all important. It's all essential.
I talk about this all the time. I've done several episodes on the power of community. And in my own life, the thing that made the most difference to my sanity, to my mental health, to my recovery from crises, everything has been having that support network. And that's one thing I do with people I work with. That's one of the first things we do is what does your support network look like? And how can we improve it? How can we build it? How can we increase it? And that kind of goes back to the men stuff. And it's building that kind of network for men specifically, because men have certain needs that I think only other men can meet. And so there's something that men can give to other men that they can't get anywhere else. So in addition to these community networks, I think having some kind of support network for men specifically, and I would say this for any group, like women build some for them, different cultures or types of people build your own network for your needs, but men in particular have a need for a network made for them.
Yeah, well, it certainly hasn't helped that, historically, not historically, like if you go way back to ancient times, but historically more recently, there's been almost this like taboo against male solidarity that it's like there's something wrong with it, right? That men are supposed to just be like unfeeling, like steel objects that just get abused and taken. And that's why men have a higher suicide rate than women and a lower life expectancy than women, is because, that's not there's nothing biological to that. And we know that there's nothing biological to that because there's a ton of societies historically where that hasn't been true. but it's true in modernity because of the fact that there's this taboo against men seeking the sorts of psychological healing that has been available to them in a lot of other more quote unquote primitive societies.
I see it coming from two directions. There's kind of that internalized masculine norm of be an island to yourself, be self-sufficient. But then, especially in the modern age, like very recent modern age, groups of men tend to be coming under scrutiny. I think people fear or are suspicious of men if they do try to come together and form groups or networks. Like all of the old boys clubs have been broken up. If men try to meet now and form some kind of network, it's the patriarchy coming back together or whatever. So there's this external kind of stigma around men alone, solely men forming groups. And there's this kind of internal sense of there's a vulnerability to it that goes counter to that.
Yeah, what's weird is I think somebody said, I don't remember who it was that said this, but it was like, I thought it was a very astute comment. That was like 50 years ago, men that were like intimate with other men were crapped on as being gay, and now they're crapped on as being like, oh, these are like, this is like rape culture, right? These are like evil, like fratty dudes that are just, but it's like the label has changed, but the same maladaptive, like suspicious behavior has continued, and with bad results, with negative results.
I agree. I think some of that's happening in the men's movement too. They're much more mindful now of the potential social consequences of their gathering together. So they tend to make concessions to the outside world. That, to me, the solution to the second type, the type I'm talking about, is to just ignore, like men should just get together anyway and not worry about what other people are going to think about it. And then you can deal with the internal stuff through the type of support networks. But they still seem to be vulnerable to how that's viewed. I don't care what people that are not men think about anything that men do. Like, I don't care about what any out group thinks about what an in group is doing. So if you're going to be a man and create a network with other men, then you need to just do it and not worry about whatever the social narrative around that is. But I find that a lot of men do, like it gets into their head, and then they worry, are we doing something bad or wrong or harmful or destructive by trying to come together and form a network?
It's certainly
but that's the current narrative that some of them buy into.
Certainly one of the problems, I think, to some extent, I wonder if that's, though, like a cope for the fact that like so many of these, especially these younger guys, is like guys that are younger than me, it's like they have like no social skills whatsoever, and they just can't. It's like they can't have male solidarity because they can't understand other people.
Yeah, they can't. And I wonder how much. I always thought that was like the internet. What is the millennials that grew up in the internet? And I noticed the change in their social skills. But then there's also the the parenting styles changed about the same time. It became that helicopter parenting where the kids never really grow up. They always have this external source around them to navigate them through life. It's like very regimented and micromanaged, and so they don't get to learn. When I was growing up, like all the neighborhood kids played with each other on our own without adult supervision, and we learned how to negotiate conflict and how to interact and communicate. And like you learn from experience and trial and error. But if the kids are not getting that, if everything's micromanaged these days, like it's school and then sports and then summer camp and like structured activities constantly, and then there's the internet where you're interfacing through technology and a screen, you're not getting that. You're not building those face-to-face social skills anymore. And then gaming too.
Yeah, well, and that's been a huge problem with the Gen Z and stuff like that, right? Is that like they're so much of their lives, so they go to school, and school is like really is a very over-controlled environment.
Yeah,
it's weird because in some ways it's an under-controlled environment. In that, like, you know, there's all sorts of just like they're being spoon-fed everything, and most of the teachers are on drugs and don't know what the hell they're doing. But at the same time, you know, there's like, but there's it's a very over controlled environment in the sense that, you know, it's like basically everything is bullying now. Like somebody looking at you the wrong way is bullying, and it's like, I mean, I've heard cases of kids getting suspended from school because they like literally because they like said like something mildly upsetting to another kid. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
But it's like so they get this over controlled environment at school, and that quashes their ability to have to develop social skills, proper social skills, and proper problem solving abilities for what happens. You know, how do you defend yourself from the bully when mommy isn't around? Basically, it's like they don't get that anymore. And what
Yeah.
now instead they get like their quote unquote social time is going online, like doing these like, you know, video calls while they're gaming, and it's just like and they don't actually even learn, you know, basic things like eye contact because they're not actually the people they're talking to. They don't even see them. Just interacting with them online, you talking into their like whatever they're called, their little like voice thingies, their headsets.
Yeah. And how do you develop autonomy and individuality? How do you become your own person if you don't have the space and opportunity to do that? If everything's controlled for you? So I think there are generational challenges as well that I think, and one thing I'm learning about men and the men's movement is the concept of mentorship, where the previous generation mentors and helps guide the future generation. We've kind of lost a lot of that, and in addition to the opportunities to develop on their own, they need some kind of mentor and guidance that they can have access to when they need it to help learn how to do that when they can't figure it out for themselves.
Well, that's what all these gurus, these Jordan Petersons, that's what they purport to be. Just clean your room. Just clean your room and it'll all be okay. But like the issue with that is that, you know, when I actually look at what people like Jordan Peterson are promoting, it doesn't seem to actually be, you know, that level of like adulthood. Really, it's like he talks a lot about like autonomy and individualism and things like that, but really, it's like when you look at what his fundamental core beliefs are, though, it's just like just socialize you in order to become, you know, a willing participant in the neoliberal system, which that's not really help you finally. I would say, yeah, it's to a large extent.
I don't know a lot about Peterson, so I'm going off what you say.
Like I'm not hugely familiar with him, mostly because I tuned him out after I really figured out what he was about. But like, from what I understand, I never got the book 12 Rules for Life. But from what I understand, it's just like a mixture of just very basic things that should be second nature to everybody. Like, you know, just don't be a lazy slob on your ass. And then mixed with like, basically just like mixed with, well, here's how you can be like a productive person within the society that is just inevitably going to be there, aka the like neoliberal, like capitalist system, but dressed up in all this nice Jungian language so that it looks like you're more than just that. It's like it's the ultimate, almost like Jordan Peterson, from what I understand it. Again, I'm basing this on only like what I've observed. I haven't looked super deep into it, but it seems like he's basically just a really, really successful motivational seminar guy for like business, and he's so successful that that people don't realize that that's what he is. He's basically just like telling people how to be productive little cogs in the wheel while allowing them to role play this illusion that there's something other than that.
I'm gonna talk to my Peterson friends and see what they say about that. I know that it's primary integration, where you're just trying to adjust yourself to whatever side you were born in, but you don't develop any kind of individuality or uniqueness of your own that then contributes or feeds back into that society and improves it in your own unique way. Like adjusting to society partially is okay as a starting point and for group harmony and cohesion. But I don't know that anyone can be satisfied in that state. I don't think it's a permanent state that people should adjust to. I
Well,
think
the
they have
problem
an
is that if you're adjusting,
individuality that they want to bring to it as well.
well, that's the thing. If the problem is that if you're adjusting to something that's maladaptive and doesn't work, then I mean that's a huge problem. If adjustment means, I mean, let's use the example of lemmings. The lemmings who, of course, as we all know, don't actually ordinarily jump off a cliff, but they were coaxed to do that by some Disney executive. But the reality is that because they were coaxed to do that, the adjustment, the way that you're a properly adjusted member of lemming society would have been to have committed suicide, to have destroyed yourself in a situation like that. Well, that's what that is that's adjusting to something that's maladaptive and abnormal, and that you don't like. I don't want to adjust to a society that, as far as I'm concerned, is not well adjusted.
Right. Dabrowski, who's the theorist I've drawn a lot, would call that positive maladjustment and consider it a good thing. It's like to not be adjusted to a society that's dysfunctional or not reflective of your own values or inferior to where you are is a maladjustment, but it's a positive version of maladjustment. And it's a sign that that's not the society for you. And you can either on your own help create the society that's more in line with who you are, or you're free to go find something that's more fitted to what your values are. So I don't think there's value in forcing yourself into a box that you don't naturally fit in.
Yeah. And that's, I feel like we all, to some extent, like obviously in every society, there's going to be a certain degree of conformity that people are going to be expected to have. But, a lot of people, and this is something which, people don't realize until they study anthropology for 10 years, like a Spurg, the way I did. But like once you do that, you understand actually there's probably more freedom of conscience and more non-conformity in many of these like seemingly less individualistic societies. Like you look at like there's actually many of these like tribal societies, there was a greater amount of self-expression that was tolerated in many ways, and there's actually a reason for that that's interesting, is that on the one hand, in a more collectivistic society, it is true that the individual needs to learn to tolerate other members of the group, but at the same time, the flip side of that is that the group also needs to be able to tolerate the individuals within it more. So it's like so in a sense there's actually a wide variety of means of self-expression that are quite tolerated in many of these tribal societies. Like you'll find that like tribal societies oftentimes have a less stigmatizing attitude towards people that are mentally ill, even though they have fewer people that are mentally ill because they're functioning better.
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, that dialectic is a very old problem in culture and philosophy, the dialectic between the individual and community. And I think there's room on both sides, because even with individualism, I think it's not just the freedom to be and do whatever you want. I think there's a certain responsibility that comes with that kind of freedom. So it's an individuality within a communal context that then you have some kind of responsibility or make some kind of contribution to.
Yeah, and that's why, like, I mean, I'm not 100% sure I even necessarily think that individualism and collectivism are valid, constructs for understanding society, because you look and you see, no, actually there's a huge, I mean, I would argue that in some ways American society, which is usually held up as being the most individualistic society, has a history of being one of the
least individualistic. There's a huge degree of social conformism that's enforced upon people within American society that they don't even know about, and that in many cases it's actually there's actually more conformism in many ways in American society than there are in many other societies. Like I mean, I've lived in supposedly collectivistic cultures in Asia, and I can actually tell you from firsthand experience, I felt more sort of like free to be a weirdo in South Korea than I did in the United States, even though South Korea is supposedly a much more, supposedly a much an extremely communal, collectivistic culture, and that they even have, there's an old proverb in Korea that says that like if the nail sticks out, it's hammered back in the board. But in spite of that, I actually felt, maybe it's because I'm an outsider coming into the culture, but even so, I got the sense even that the natives that live there felt like they were under less pressure to socially conform in every little aspect of their lives. Whereas I feel like to a large degree, at least in American middle class society, I think this is less so in working class America, but in American middle class society, there's so little freedom to break out of the mold.
Yes. I think middle class, you're right. Why do you think that is in Korea? Like, even being collectivist, why do you think there was that freedom there and not here?
Honestly, I think it's because they're more traditional. Honestly, it's because, and this is something which, reading all these like ethnographies from all these societies in the past, one thing that I keep noticing over and over again is they'll actually say like, oh, hey, I lived in like some Quechua village in the Andes. I didn't, but I'm saying like some anthropologists will say I lived in some Quechua village in the Andes, and in this village, there was this ideal of how like everybody was supposed to behave. If you were a good Quechua, you acted like this and you had these values. But by the way, just so you know, there were a lot of people that, were deviant for whatever reason. And despite the fact that these values were so heavily touted as this is part of what being Quechua is having like this sort of normative value system, all these deviants, including a lot of people that would have been seen as possibly mentally ill, nobody really batted an eye, and people just thought, okay, we're just going to tolerate these people and we're going to, accept these people to a certain degree because, again, in a more collectivistic culture, it works both ways. On the one hand, yes, you as the individual need to be able to get along with people, but on the other hand, that's true for everybody. If you're the not mentally ill person, then you also need to be more competent in getting along with the mentally ill people instead of just, crapping on them and bullying them and saying, oh, well, these people don't belong in my nice little, Stepford Wives suburban neighborhood. It's like there's a certain tolerance that comes with growing up in a traditional society that I think a lot of people don't realize. A lot of people don't realize this, that like bullying is actually much more of a problem in our society than it would be in a traditional society, because in a traditional society, even the deviants, there's still sort of that in-group cohesion that's like, oh, like, okay, I'm a Quechua Indian living up in the Andes, and my neighbor might be like, psychotic or something. My neighbor might go walk around, speaking in rhymes and thinking that they're Jesus or something. But even so, they're still they're still my fellow Quechua villager, and I got to stick by them. You know what I mean?
That makes a lot of sense to me. I grew up in a more traditional culture, and I found that to be true too. They were much more tolerant about my differences and weirdness than I think people up here in the blue state are. There's a lot more pressure. It's more of a middle class culture up here, and there's a lot more pressure to conform.
Well, I feel that in my own
middle class
experience. Oh, I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
I feel that in my own experience, I've seen that because I've seen both sides of it, right? Like I've seen, I grew up in Appalachia, so I grew up in like, very, very working class, farming country, timber country, coal mining country. Textiles were big in the area where I grew up. It's extremely blue collar working class, very small town. The town I grew up in does not have any stoplights or anything. It's very, very like American South, but not like, old plantation South, but rather like Appalachian. Not West Virginia, but think West Virginia. That sort of area is the area where I would have grown up. And I never felt like there was something fundamentally like, I never felt out of place until I went to college, and all of a sudden I was around all these like, middle class and upper middle class people. And it's like, they just seemed fundamentally shallow to me in a way that I was not ready for, because I was around people that were salt of the earth, real people.
Yep. that I have friends that have said the same thing. They've because I'm from Louisiana, and they've gone off to liberal colleges in the Midwest or stuff like that, and they've had the same experience. Even just being from the South in that culture made them an outsider, an oddball in these supposedly tolerant liberal cultures.
Well, because to some extent, I think, and I have to actually hop off pretty soon, but I can't say this. To some extent, I think that part of that is because like a lot of what like liberalism is now, especially nowadays with like the Democratic Party having become, basically this like bourgeois cult. I think a lot of what that is really is that this modern suburban style liberalism, not necessarily, the leftism of 50 years ago, like the George McGovern type, but like the current breed of like modern establishment liberalism is really just like a gigantic virtue signal. And it's really just like a way for these middle class people, these soulless middle class people, to present themselves as something other than soulless middle class people. It's almost like they realized, after a certain point that like, everybody back in the 80s when they were associated with being, Reaganites or something like, it was like, oh wow, everybody hates us because we're just like coming straight out and saying that we're like douchebags who hate the poor. So now let's like pull this ultimate like virtue signal psyop move where we're like, no, actually we're like the liberals that are like compassionate and all that. And now, therefore, we're not, see, now that we vote liberal, now that we support liberal policies, now we're much more free to actually look down on everybody else and be totally intolerant and totally oppress poor people, all the sorts of things they weren't allowed to do when they were just openly, super right wingers.
Yeah, I've noticed there's a much more conformity in that group than anywhere else I've ever experienced. Hey, Steve, what's up?
What's up, man?
How's it going? I'm actually about to head out, but it was a good talk.
Yeah, it was a great talk. Machine Light said he's going to be on 8:45 or 9 later tonight. I'm not sure what time zone, but he is doing a stream.
Awesome. I can be there maybe around 11, 12 Eastern time. I know, well, it'll be an hour back for him because he's from Michigan.
Okay, well, maybe I'll catch you there too. It was great talking.
Right.
Thanks for
great talking to you as well. Take care.
Hey, take care. Nice library, Steve. What is in them books?
Knowledge, my friend, knowledge. Tons of books. I got more books. You can't even see them. They're like up there.
Oh,
and then there's some over here, and yeah, I got them coming out everywhere, dude. I'm gonna have to get.
Have you read all of them?
Soon. So I've read about, I would probably say about 80%, 90% of those.
Close enough to all.
I haven't read that one. I don't know why my wife put the Hershey's chocolate and the Nutella on my desk, but it's okay.
Product placement.
Right. Fatal Invention is the only one on the bottom that I haven't read.
What are you reading currently? Do you have a stack?
Yes, I do. I am reading a couple of books right now. I'm reading Corruptible by Brian Klaas. The Judicial War on Men is a long read. That one's by Eric Nielsen. Oh, man. What else am I reading? Dude, I read like 5 books at a time sporadically, so it's like weird. Oh,
Yeah, I do
the economics of forced labor. That one's a really interesting one. That's a book that investigates how the economic of forced labor functioned in the Soviet gulags. It's actually really good.
Oh. Does it have implications for today?
Always. I mean, most of the time it's lessons that you have to learn to not do, but not really any advice. Really, it's just the economics of forced labor. I haven't gotten really too far into it. Like I'm like 10 pages into it, so it's going to be really interesting to see what the book is really going to try and flesh out. But the other book, Corruptible, I think that's it. Yeah, that's that book right there. It's a really good book. That is Who Gets Power and How It Changes Us. And it kind of explores how we set up institutions to favor people who have dark triad traits.
Oh my God. I've had this is like the third or fourth conversation where the dark triad has come up this week.
Yeah, it's a big thing, man. It's a thing.
Yeah, I know. I can't seem to keep it out of my life.
Yeah. Well, there was a new study. I'll have to send it to you. This was really interesting. So the most recent study that I've found, just wandering around the depths of the internet, is that there's a study that identifies a very, very strong correlation between what is it called? They call it something. It's advertising your victimhood or something like that, and a huge correlation between that and narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. It's really interesting.
Correlation between what?
I'll have to. Sorry?
Between what? Correlation between what?
There's a correlation between people who outwardly state that they're a victim and they're proud to be a victim, kind of type of mentality. Like, God, what was the name of it? Oh, that is seriously killing me. I can't remember the name of it. But you know what? Hold on. I know where it's at. Give me just a sec.
Well, they have covert narcissism too,
yeah,
which is similar to that victimhood type. I think they should add borderline and make it a rectangle.
Well, it really should be. Okay, where is it? Come on. There we go. So it's signaling virtuous victimhood as indicators of dark triad personalities. I mean, dude, this is a 28-page study. I mean, the number of people that they are pulling and studying, because they're taking different studies as well, multivariate study. And it's a pretty big number, dude. I'm trying to find where the number is. That it's difficult to actually say like this is how much, but let me get down to the bottom here. Conclusion. Let's see if I can read it on my little screen, even though I got my glasses on. Let's see here. The obligation to alleviate others' pain can be found in the most of the world's moral systems. It also appears to be built into the structure of the mind by evolution, as evidenced by human tendency to feel distress at signs of suffering. It is therefore not surprising that many people are motivated to help perceived victims of misfortune and disadvantage. But the downside of this proclivity is that it can also lead to people to... Sorry, I'm having a hard time reading today. Okay, so all victims... oh my God. Lead people to easily be persuaded that all victim signals are accurate signals, particularly when they perceive the alleged victim as being a good person. When this occurs, well-meaning people might allocate their material and social resources to those who are neither victims nor virtuous, which necessarily diverts resources from those who are legitimately in need. Effective altruism requires the ability to differentiate between false and true victims. Credulous acceptance of all virtuous victim signals as genuine can also enable and reward fraudulent claims, particularly by those with antisocial personality traits. Our work raises the possibility this possibility, and by doing so, it advances our understanding of how moral goals and those who seek to minimize human suffering can be most effectively persuaded. That's just the conclusion, but there's actually a lot more in there.
Dude, how I see this over and over and over. This I call it the damsel in distress because I usually see it with women, but I guess it could be anyone. How do
Yeah.
you tell what's genuine victimhood versus what's triggering that evolutionary instinct to come to the aid of the victim? Because I've seen some super intelligent, like really high IQ people
Yeah.
still fall for false victimhood.
Well, it's an innate part of our humanity that we want to connect with other human beings, and you can do that over multiple different ways. I think I used to do a lot of victim advocacy, and my experience is that people who tend to have these traumatic experiences are not proud of them. They're not happy that they have them, and they would much rather not have them. They tend to remember almost everything in picture perfect detail. They don't mask their memories. They don't be like, I don't remember that. There are some instances where that does happen, but for the most part, traumatic experiences, they don't involve memory loss generally. And I'm not a psychiatrist or a therapist or anything like that. So please, for all means, fucking question me, make sure that I'm correct. But there was an interesting paragraph in here, and it was although our studies together show a reliable association between dark triad personalities and the frequency of emitting the virtuous victim signal, as well as the predictive power of the signal frequency for the inclination to engage in deceptive behaviors in a variety of domains, we do not have infallible evidence or knowledge about the individual life histories of participants as it relates to their victimhood perceptions. So while they found a correlation, they can't necessarily prove that the people were either victims or not. That's not the point of the study. The point of the study is to see if there's a correlation between those dark triad traits and victimhood emitting behavior. So because there's a lot of victims out there, and I don't like calling them victims. I prefer harmed people. That's what I usually use in the terminology, is harmed people, because I don't get to tell you you're a victim or a survivor. That's not my place. It's not my job. So the harmed person, where was I going? Oh man, I totally forgot where I was at. Yeah, totally. I just totally lost where I was at, man. Help me out here.
It was how you could tell the one from the other,
Oh,
like the
well,
false victims.
yeah, I mean, it's not up to me to determine whether someone is a victim or a survivor or even a harmed person. Really, it's just my job was to investigate those things. So I went in. I didn't give a shit. I went in there. I collected data and information, did interviews, collected evidence and stuff like that. That's what I did. And so my concern isn't whether or not that trauma is real to you. My job is to collect information and data, because your trauma, I can't take your trauma away. I can't heal you from from an external position, right? Like, what happened to you happened to you. And there's nothing I'm going to do to change that. The best thing I can do is do my fucking job and get the information that the people need to have to be able to make decisions about what we're going to do next. So that's kind of how I approached it. It was, you almost have to have a level of disconnect there, because you can't live with some of these things that these people have gone through. The secondary trauma is a real thing, and I definitely live with a lot of secondary trauma, but it's something that you deal with. And I talk to a therapist, and I have it out with them, and we figure out solutions.
Is that vicarious trauma from absorbing?
Yeah. There's just a
people's
lot of really nasty things that I've been witness to and had to see it, and it's not pretty. It's kind of like, I didn't work with children, but I have friends that did work for task forces and stuff like that would basically special victims units in my local area. And most of the time, they don't have these people serve more than a couple months, maybe a couple of years at the max. Like my friend did it for 5, and she was already like, she was done. And they kick you out after 5 years. They don't give you an option. Like, you need to leave. You need to go do something else. And so they'll go into internal affairs, or they'll go back to walking a beat. And most of the time they don't. They'll become detectives for theft or something like that, where it's not as much, of an egregious violation that they have to deal with and interview. Because that's something, as you're hearing someone speak these things, Like that's a traumatic experience, you know, sitting across from someone, seeing the visible evidence that something happened to them, and you have to just be straight faced and, you know, take that home with you, because you can't just shut that off. You're taking it home with you. You're taking it everywhere with you. So you definitely need to be cautious about doing that kind of stuff.
Yeah. It takes some healthy boundaries too.
Yeah. The only time
the
I've ever been able to really definitively say someone was lying is when I either had clear evidence of it. So there was one case where I actually had video evidence that was completely conflicting the person's story, and confronted them about it, and they're like, yeah, I'm lying. Yeah, because they got caught red-handed. What are they going to do? You know what I mean? There's other times where stories don't match
they
up.
said they were faking. Yeah.
Yeah, they said they lied about it because they were confronted with it straight up. And then there's another time where you know, two people were involved in a problem or a situation, and I gathered all the evidence, and it was just like the person who was claiming they were harmed were the only people who had that perception. All the other like 10 people were just like, no, what happened did not go that way and was not that thing that person is saying it was. And it was just like, when you have 10 people corroborating evidence like that, it's a really strong indicator that person is lying. But you know, yeah.
I'm thinking of it in the context, like it shows up in group dynamics a lot with that victim, rescuer, perpetrator triangle. So just in a social situation, you can have somebody feel victimized, and then they try to enlist one or more people in the group to be the rescuer, and it sets someone else as the perpetrator, and the group kind of starts to fragment. So in those situations, it's how to get the rescuers to know when the person is in authentic need of rescue, or when it's a false victimization that's going to threaten the group dynamic or the group cohesion.
Well, and you know, in group out group bias and human coalition building play a large role in that, in my opinion. And the problem is you're always going to have a loud few that are, you know, the white knights, and so to speak, and you know, they say, well, this person can't speak for themselves, so I'll speak for them. And you know, the problem is the message gets mistranslated, and on top of that, sometimes they might know someone else who has harmed someone, but they don't speak out at that person, but they'll speak out about this person. And so there's just a huge conflict between narratives, and between where people selectively direct their anger and vitriol. That was something difficult to have to deal with too, because they're not being dishonest. They really do care about that person. But you also have to be like, so you have a problem against this person, but you are friends with this person who did the same exact thing, but you're not screaming their name at the top of the building, being like, hey, look at this person. So it's you know, it's a difficult situation. Not everybody's perfect, and people are human beings, and they make mistakes, and they have blind spots. You just kind of got to give them a little bit of charity, a little bit of grace. If you're Christian, give them a little bit of grace.
Fortunately, I'm not. So
yeah, neither am I. So we're all good. So I'll give people charity as much as I possibly can until I can't give them anymore. So,
I usually try to give them truth.
I would prefer truth like 10 times out of 10, dude. I would much rather people just be honest.
These group dynamic things seem to be maybe not impervious to truth, but they operate independently of truth. So truth seems to have very little effect. It's all emotional reasoning, and like you said, in-group bias. So laying out the facts and trying to show how the situation actually is seems to have very little effect on how that dynamic ends up playing out anyway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I mean, you know, because there's two conscious observers of what has transpired, generally, we're just going to say normally, you have two people that witnessed some or were involved in an altercation. Let's say there's nobody else, right? You can safely say there's objective truth, subjective truth, and the truth. Like there's three different truths involved here. And what I mean by that is there's factual information, there's perception of the factual information and how that translates, and then there's the absolute truth, right? And it's really difficult to discern those three things, is what I found. And I'm probably not explaining it really well, but that's kind of how.
What is absolute truth? Like I don't know if we ever have access to that.
I don't think we do, but we do have some kind of intuition of it. That's an inside joke for everybody watching. Me and Jeff are talking to PF
That's
Young
why.
earlier.
See, I'm kind of on your side with that. I think it's intuition certainly has a place, but intuition supported by logic or in the service of
So
logic or backed up by logic.
something I wish I would have mentioned in that stream, and I'm going to bring it up to Paul if I talk to him again, is intuition is the motivating force for direction, right? So we have an intuition, we go in that direction, and then we seek out information, facts, evidence along that way, and try to make the best decision according to that. But the problem is sometimes our intuition leads us in the wrong direction right off the bat.
Confirmation
That's
bias.
why I have a problem with intuition. You have to have an intuition be like, that's my immediate intuition. That means I'm going to go exactly the opposite direction. And you start investigating from the opposite direction. If that doesn't pan out, then you go with your initial.
You're saying that's what you do? You deliberately?
Yeah, that's exactly what I do. I never follow my intuition. And the reason why is because, for one, that's self-selecting bias. For real. Like, I'm going to be biased towards my own personal opinion. I have numerous biases already in place that there's nothing I can do about it. I'm a human being, right? So the only thing that I can do about it is look at my intuitions, look at my biases, and be like, these are my blind spots. I'm just going to go in the other direction, and I'm going to start investigating that and see if it pans out, see if I come back around to this place. I think people have a tendency to be scared of being confused or being uncomfortable. And oftentimes the truth lies in those two things. It lies in uncomfortableness, and it lies in obscurity. It's a very difficult thing to become comfortable with.
Confusion is unbearable to me. Like, when I'm in a state of confusion, the only thing that alleviates it is truth, like knowing the truth, as close to the truth as I can find. Because it's that feeling of not knowing, not having the truth, and it's a combination of frustration and disappointment. And so it throws me in this state of confusion. And the only thing that ever gets me out of it is truth.
Yeah. So the problem is if you have only two parties that were subjected to this issue, you will never know what it is. And the problem is people fall into, leave that up for just a sec. People fall into the dichotomy of black and white. They're like, well, I can't figure it out, so I'm just going to go based on my gut feeling, and I think that person is innocent or that person is guilty. Right. And that's the problem that I have with intuition, is it's a black and white thought process that allows for zero nuance. So really, I use intuition as a directing force, and then I use and apply logic and reason and evidence post that. Instinct
and that served you like so far?
Knowledge and imagination. Like I said, machine lies. I think it's a primary motivating force, but I don't think it's a primary position to really make opinions and decisions by. It's just horribly inaccurate a lot of the times.
Has your method of deliberately following the opposite worked for you? Has it produced
immensely
success more often than not? Okay.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Because I'm not playing into any kind of biases that I have. I'm actually going against those things. Let me see if I can think of an example. Okay, here's a perfect example. So like you guys all know that I'm avid anti-communist, right? My intuition is that it's a horrible system. Marxism is a horrible system, and it should never be practiced anywhere. So once I start taking that position, I start looking and investigating why it has such clout, why it has such appeal to people. And you start looking into it, and you can actually see Marx trying to make something of something that he can see intuitively, but ends up making horrible mistakes along the way, trying to explain his intuition rather than following the evidence where it lies. So Marxism is a really great lens to be able to critique capitalism, but that's it. That's all it should ever be. It should never go into practice. It shouldn't be a system of governance, like, ever. It's a horrible system that leads to death and destruction everywhere it's been implemented. But it does have its benefits. It does have its usefulness. And so that's an example of me not following my initial intuition.
Paul says the same thing. He did a whole video on the positive
Oh, really?
aspects of Marxism. Yeah, and
Oh, that's cool. I haven't seen that
we
yet.
disagreed over some of it.
Yeah, that's easy to do. But yeah, I'm still an avid anti-communist to this day, man. I still will not promote it. But I do use it sometimes to look at certain things in certain ways to see if I'm not seeing something that I could be seeing somewhere else. It can kind of inform you a little bit.
Well, that seems like just being a balanced thinker, like trying to see all sides
Yeah,
of an issue.
yeah, I would say so.
Which to me it's an approach to the truth.
What was that Machine Lies said?
He said Marxism presumes capitalism as its starting point because it assumes industrial society. And that goes along
Right.
with the tweet I saw earlier this week that the word capitalism itself is a Marxist term to make free
Yep.
trade seem like something.
Yeah,
bad
capitalism
news.
didn't exist until Marx made up a name for it.
Yeah.
So the interesting thing that he's saying there is also this, which is capitalism is a natural innate human tendency. So let's say you have 5 beans and I have 2 apples and I need some beans. I'm going to trade you a couple of apples for a couple of beans. And we have to hash that out to see which one means what to each other, right? What's the value of those things? And then we trade according to that. All capitalism is the trading of some apples for some beans. That's it. It's a trade-off. Thomas Sowell spoke about this too. So like at the very base, people call it the barter system. Capitalism is bartering. That's exactly what it is. Right? It's just a little bit more complicated than just a simple bartering trade. Because you can get into like very, very complicated economic systems. But that's what capitalism is. It's just literally barter and trade, just on a grander scale, with an agreed upon value, mostly agreed upon value of the delineation of money. So, yeah.
Yeah.
And Marx's labor theory of value was absolutely stupid. Just saying that out there.
I haven't read any Marx. I'll be honest. So I'm probably not ever going to read it. I'm just not interested in him.
I read him a lot a couple of years ago. I actually still keep a copy of the Communist Manifesto in my truck to read when I'm bored.
Oh.
That's what I read when I'm bored in the truck. But it's so if you want a better labor theory of value, a really good one is done by a man named Alain Locke. He was an early 19th century black scholar. He was the first Rhodes Scholar. And he came up with the labor theory of value, which he was a 90-pound gay man in Harlem, for crying out loud. And he came up with this amazing and beautiful theory of value that I wish I had the competence to explain right now, but it has been at least a year and a half since I've actually read that, and I would not feel comfortable explaining it. But Marx's theory is based solely off of the fact that the main thing, which is the human labor, doesn't actually have a value. That's where Marx made the mistake. There's no value in human labor because he assumes all of that value is taken up by the capitalist. So there's issues. I can go into that for a moment.
I don't get it.
Probably not explaining myself really well.
I don't get there not being value in human labor.
So Marx didn't believe that there was value in the human. Well, he actually let me reverse here. I've got to remember. I just woke up from a nap, so just bear with me for a second because I'm a little bit fuzzy. You know what?
I have to pee. So can you sit here and think and man the show for a few seconds, and I'll come right
absolutely,
back.
Absolutely. I'll try and watch
turning it over to Steve for a little bit.
I'll try and watch the comments and see if I can enjoy some stuff here. Yes, he mixed the materialism of Hobbes with the economic theory of Locke. What he rejected about Locke's moral system is his view on individual freedom. Marx saw man as determined by society and history. You should probably take a nap, Machine Lies. I'm assuming you're talking about John Locke and not Elaine Locke. But so John Locke was phenomenal when he understood the importance of individual value that resides within the freedom of that individual, versus Marx, who was so highly focused on the person gaining capital and gaining excess capital that he never really gave a whole lot of thought to the other aspects of what makes a product valuable. Human labor is one, resources is another, and he left out certain chunks of that. And I can't remember off the top of my head which one it was, but he left out the value of human labor, if I remember correctly. He left out the value of human labor when making calculations for his labor theory of value. I need to go back and apparently I need to restudy this because I am so rusty. So I apologize. But John Locke is one of my favorite philosophers and economists. It was just really amazing. Him and honestly, I love Jean-Jacques Rousseau, The Social Contract. I love Adam Smith, Thomas More, all of those great writers, and understanding that there was a unique difference between the morality system that they were trying to implement or argue for versus what had always existed, which was very oppressive and very wealth was really held in the hands of a very select few, versus now where we actually, because up until pretty much America, there was no middle class anywhere. You were either poor or you were wealthy. There was no middle class. And so once capitalism started to come about, we started to realize, holy cow, this is actually working. We're actually lifting people out of poverty. And the people that are being lifted out of poverty are coming into the middle class. And the middle class is one of the strongest classes there are. Unfortunately, now we've gone away from elevating the middle class to elevating the rich class. And that's where we've kind of got this problem that we do have now.
Who's the we?
Well, society in general. Marx ignored
It's not like the rich are
nation
elevating themselves.
Well, the rich will always elevate themselves, and they will get us to do it for them as well. You saw this during slavery. It was rich landowners would, because the only way to discriminate between poor whites and poor blacks was to get poor whites on your side and be like, you should hate those people over there. They threaten your existence, right? So the wealthy landowners got the poor white folk to keep the black folk down. They didn't even have to do anything. Rich folk didn't even have to do anything. There's a really good story of that. I can't remember where I saw it, but it's not Tommy Curry. It was somebody else. Yeah, have a good day, Machine Lies. But God, where was that? It was, man, that's gonna really piss me off, dude. That's the problem, is I read so much that I retain the general gist of the book, but I can never remember like extreme details. And I guess I'm just a normal human being with an average IQ, so I don't expect too much of myself.
I question that.
What?
That the bookshelf you have behind you and the amount of reading that you do is not a normal human being with an average IQ.
Well, I know what mine is, and I'm not gonna mention it, but I would like, I was a meth and heroin addict when I was younger, and it really messed up my ability to retain information. I had to learn how to retain information. Now I read really slowly. But what I'll do too is I'll double learn, which means I'll listen to the audiobook. And if I think the audiobook is worth it, I'll go and buy the paper version of that. So now I'm going to read it again. So first I listened to it. Now I'm reading it again. And now I'm becoming familiar with the conversation that I'm having with the book. So it helps me retain the information a lot better. So books that I've actually read and listened to, I have way better retention. Way better retention. Because they were talking about it was Jordan Peterson and Ian McGilchrist. And Ian McGilchrist wrote a book called The Master and His Emissary. And it was a phenomenal freaking book. And if you want to understand human nature, man, read that book. It's also an Audible. Phenomenal book. Phenomenal book. Absolutely phenomenal.
That's the one about the brain, the two sides of the brain.
Yeah. So how he represented is that the rider of the elephant, that's actually your logical brain. The elephant is your intuitive brain, and it's a it's preferable to have it be a symbiotic relationship. But more often than not, the elephant goes where it wants, but it convinces the rider that that's where he needs to go. So it's a really fascinating book, and McGilchrist did an amazing amount of research himself, and he puts forward a very, very strong argument, one that I doubt anybody is going to be able to challenge in the next 200 years. I really don't think so. It's
Well, now I
that good
wanna
of a
read it.
book. Yeah, it's that good of a book. Changed the way that I thought about even how I personally function. It's like I'm constantly asking myself, well, am I being motivated by, this, or am I being motivated by this, or, and it gives you an opportunity to kind of investigate yourself a little bit and just be like, hey, maybe there's an issue here,
It
but
sounds like a variation
yeah.
on Plato and the Chariot with the black and white horses.
I have not read that yet.
The allegory of that, like there's a black horse pulling you in one direction and a
Yeah.
white horse trying to pull you in a different direction. You're the driver and you have to manage the two impulses.
Oh, interesting.
My roommate has it, so I think I'm going to add it to my stack and take a look at it.
I have Plato up there, and I have Marcus Aurelius, and I have Aristotle somewhere. But yeah,
most of this shit goes back to Plato and Aristotle and the pre-Socratics.
Yeah, I mean, brilliant minds even back then. I mean, that shows you the value of human intelligence and human drive and the human spirit. It's amazing.
Clump is wondering if you can listen to Master Emissary, or does it need diagrams?
So you can listen to it. I don't recall it there being a lot of diagrams that come with it, but a lot of times if you get the Audible book, it will come with a PDF file that actually has all of the diagrams that you really need to look at. And you can actually, because it's in your library and you've purchased it, you retain that PDF forever as long as it's available on their server. A lot of the times, I mean, if you have to explain it with diagrams and you can't verbally or vocally explain what you're trying to explain, it's really difficult. So there was a book called Intuition Pumps by Daniel Dennett, which is a really difficult book to listen to. You have to read it because that does have diagrams in it. And if you don't read the diagrams, you're not going to understand it. I tend to stay away from those books, but The Master and His Emissary, believe me, it was phenomenal. Read the book. Pixel, sure. How do we neutralize the impact of dark triad personalities going into the future?
That's a question very close to my heart.
So
I think we could, we can't do anything about the psychopaths because a lot of that's innate and then nurture. But you're talking about minimize the impact of them on our lives, other people's lives.
Yeah, I think that's what they're talking about. Honestly, one of the best things you can do for a psychopath is have them ensure that they have a good, caring, loving, compassionate, and present mother. If you look at most psychopaths,
you can't control what kind of mothers people have.
I know you can't. I'm just saying, if you want to decrease it, that's the best option you've got. Because most of the psychopaths, including, what was his name? Damn it.
Ted Bundy?
He was in, no,
Charles
not Ted
Manson?
Bundy. No. He was a big dude, incredibly intelligent. Anyways, so the FBI interviewed a lot of psychopaths, and what they found was that the ones that had the most severe form of psychopathy, they usually had very, very poor mother figures in their lives. It's one of the very few brain disorders that hinges on the mother.
It's
Most of the other
epigenetics.
ones hinge on the father. Yeah.
The theory is it's innate and the innate tendencies, and then it's the nurture, whatever type of nurture they have, that determines the level of psychopathy that actually manifests.
I am not a huge fan of epigenetics, but I understand the concept, and I can see why it would make sense to some people. But this is a thing where I think intuition is leading us in the wrong direction. I think there's better explanations for epigenetics.
So what's
But
the opposite path? That it's
I'm
not
sorry?
innate. What's the opposite path of that intuition? I'm using your method. That it's because the intuition, let's say, is that it's innate, and
Right.
that the nurture is going to determine how those innate tendencies manifest or develop. Let's say, because it's developmental trauma from a very, very early
Right.
age.
So remember, compared to what? So we're comparing it to, so some people think that it's an innate part of you, and some people think it's a nurture problem, right?
I think
I don't think there's
I think
ever a
it's
time where you
innate.
can't say it's not both, but much more influenced by one over the other, depending upon
But
whatever it
people
is
that are not born with the potential for it, or even with the same nurture, are not going to become psychopaths. So there's something that
Right.
genetic that they have to bring
Definitely.
to the nurture.
Definitely. And they did a study where they took can't remember if it was sociopaths or psychopaths, but one of the two, I think it was psychopaths. They just don't have that ability to empathize with people. But when asked
No,
to
it's
imagine
animal brain.
what they were asked to imagine what that person would feel like, and the brain started firing those same receptors that they would see in you or I, who are not psychopaths. So they have the ability. It's not connected to anything. It's just hanging out there, right? They can access it if they really want to, but there's no reason to.
You know about the cognitive empathy,
Right, cognitive empathy.
not necessarily the
So,
emotional empathy.
yeah, I think it's something that happens in utero. Um, I don't necessarily think it's epigenetic or even genetic in that part, because there's a lot of the times these families, there's only one person who is truly psychopathic, right? They might have a family that has really bad habits, like parental habits, a lack of concern, alienation, abandonment, right? They'll have all these problems. But it takes a perfect storm to take that family. Then you give them a psychopath and an unpresent parent, model, and you've got a psychopath that is more than happy with murdering people. So from what I've read, I just don't. I'm not saying that epigenetics is not true or correct. I'm saying I'm having a hard time biting on the apple right now.
Well, I'm just saying nature, like what you said, a combination of nature and nurture.
Yeah. That's where I lie. Is there's the combination
which
of both.
ties it back to what you were saying about the mother. But it could be the father
Yeah.
too. You could have an abusive father that creates a psychopath too, or activates that tendency.
From what I've read, and feel free to find out if I'm full of shit, but from what I remember is that psychopathy is really the only one of those dark triads that's really strongly correlated with mother involvement. So if you have a psychopath, and I've got a friend who is actually a clinical psychopath, and he actually had a very strong role model for a mother, very, very strong, very stern, very disciplined, but very caring, very loving. And he is as normal as you and I are. He just is aware that there's a disconnect there that most people don't have. And so he went and he actually got clinically diagnosed, and sure enough, he is psychopathic. But then you get other people. It's not Ted Bundy. Who was it? God, that is going to bug the crap out of me that I cannot remember this dude's name. But this guy, he even admitted his mother was abusive, narcissistic, self-centered, verbally abusive, emotionally abusive, and it turned him. And he was able to give the FBI investigators like a chronological order of his mental history leading up to when he decided to finally kill her and kill all the other women that he killed too. So, that's the weird thing is, like, I think there's a strong, from what I remember, there's a strong correlation between psychopathy, murder, and mother involvement, healthy mother nurturing involvement. So yeah, but how do we neutralize the impact? I think, in my personal opinion, the best thing you can do is not be around a psychopath.
That's what I was going to say. Identify them and get them out of your life. Like,
yeah,
keep them out of your
Machiavellians
life.
you can work with. You can work with Machiavellians because you can somewhat try to persuade them. Machiavellians you can persuade. Sociopaths you can kind of influence in one way or the other to some degree, because what they're looking for is attachment. They're looking for attention. But psychopaths, man, they're not even on the radar as the other two.
No,
in my personal
they're
opinion.
predator. They're
Yeah.
working off of the animal brain, and they're
Yeah.
just predatory, predator
Yeah.
prey.
So I've got friends who are just absolute narcissists, which most of them are female. And that's a study that was done as well. As they found that more females are narcissistic than males are by quite a large margin. But let's say that you've got a narcissistic male. I can deal with a narcissistic male. The best way to deal with a narcissistic male is to have another male that is bigger, badder, meaner, and smarter than they are. That's the best thing that you can do. There's a person in my life that I know very well who has sociopathy. He's a narcissistic sociopath. He was diagnosed when he was very young. And the best way that we figured to keep that person under control was basically to have someone there meaner, angrier, and smarter than they are, to be able to call them on their shit and push them in a direction that they need to go, rather than off the deep end into a very unhealthy way of going about things. And it turns out this guy he's really learned. He's grown over the last 10 years. He's really he's become a pretty solid guy, and now he's going to be a father here pretty soon, and we're really excited for him. So there are ways to mitigate these damages, but psychopathy, to be frank, you're fucked. In my personal opinion, I won't even mess around with them. I'll leave. I'll get out of there for the most part. If they're the wrong kind of psychopath. My friend who is a psychopath, he is a great person. He does a lot of community service. So Machiavellianism is basically, it doesn't matter how you get there. The end matters. The ends justify the means. That's Machiavellianism in a nutshell. They will come up with, they'll come up with a goal, and it doesn't matter how they get there. That goal is the most important thing. If they have to step on people, crush people, break bones to get there, they'll do it.
Lie, manipulate.
Even if it's a good thing, even if it's a good goal and it would benefit humanity, it's not how you win. It's not how you play the game. It's how you win. Or it's that you do win, right? A good, healthy person is going to say, no, how we win actually does matter. Like how we actually play the game and how we actually win actually does matter a lot. But Machiavellians don't have that same sense.
Yeah.
So, hope that answers your question. Sociopaths, they're always looking for approval in one way or another. That's one of the best ways you can look at it. Wait. That's narcissist. Sorry.
Yeah.
That's narcissist. Yeah. You know what? I don't remember enough about sociopathy right now to be able to speak on that.
They're just dead. They're just empty inside. They're dead. There's nothing in there. Narcissists have this immense feeling of inferiority that they have to counter by this grandiose self-image that has to constantly be reinforced.
They have to construct their own importance.
Underneath it all is this sense of worthlessness and inferiority that's so painful that they have to maintain it.
Which is why they seek out positions of power and authority.
Yeah, and if they're challenged, they go into defensive.
Yeah. You can tell a narcissist because they will lie as they're backing up. They'll just drop lies everywhere and hope that they blanket the ground with enough lies that you'll just give up, or you'll stop challenging them. But yeah, so sociopaths, if I remember now that you reminded me of that, sociopaths are very unique because they have their own feelings. They're just very dulled feelings, but they don't give a shit about anybody else's. They really don't care.
They're just
self-interest, very high self-interest. But yeah. So that's kind of where the question is going to ultimately lead is you have to decide for yourself. Like once you find out that this person is this thing, because a lot of people will say, well, he's a narcissist or she's a narcissist. Most of the time they're not. Most of the time it's
And
insecurity.
narcissism is on a spectrum. So there's malignant
It is.
narcissism, which are the bad kind that you would avoid. But I mean, even babies and toddlers are narcissistic and have that
Oh,
self-absorption.
absolutely.
So it's
That is something that we
whatever
have to
where they
grow
are
out
on the
of.
spectrum
Yeah.
and how much you can tolerate it in your life.
Yeah. I mean, look at teenagers. Half the reason why we have problems with teenagers is because everything is self-involved. Like everything is about me. You know, it's about them. It's like me. Right. And it's not until we get into our 20s and sometimes even to our 30s and 40s where we're finally like, okay, there's something more than me here. I need to work for my family. I need to raise these children. I need to have a job to be able to put food on my table. And life does a 360 or a 180 degrees. And they finally are like, okay, I understand stuff now. I think that's kind of where, you know, my personal belief is. I don't know where Jeff's is, but that's where mine is.
Well, as far as narcissist or normal healthy, I think normal healthy people can do that. I don't know if a narcissist can ever make that.
Yeah, I'm just talking about like
leap.
narcissistic centered people as they're growing up through the stage of childhood, adolescence, and then adulthood. It'll usually resolve itself. If it's a natural narcissistic tendency, it'll resolve itself as soon as you
Oh,
start
yeah.
having more responsibilities, children, house, mortgages, careers, job, school, stuff like that will really kick those people out of that narcissistic trait disorder. But people that are just dyed in the wool fucking narcissists, I mean, they can be highly successful or not successful at all, but pretend that they're very successful to make themselves feel good. That's something that you can tell. Also, narcissists, a really good way of telling a narcissist is they will make assumptions and they will try to gaslight you. Meaning, let's say that, you know, me and Jeff know each other, you know, fairly well. Let's say I hyperextend my knowledge of him and say, well, you know me, Jeff, I would never do that. No, Jeff actually doesn't know that. Jeff does not know that I wouldn't do that because we aren't that close, right? That's what I mean by hyperextending. Narcissists will do that constantly. And it's a way of gathering people. It's a way of getting people close and getting them to trust you. Yeah, it's a horrible trait. So watch out for that one. That's a real one.
And I think also having if you're not any of these things, getting yourself involved in a healthy community. Because if a community is healthy and not dysfunctional, it can sometimes filter out these personality types.
Yeah, that is true. Yeah. Well, and another thing too is like don't mistake self-centered for narcissistic. Those are two very different things. You know, I'm very self-centered. Yet I have learned over time, like I need to be more invested in people around me. And so that's why I do the things that I do and I behave the way that I do. I build people up around me. I don't take any credit. I make sure that I don't put my name on shit. Like I give other people all the credit for all of their growth and all of their achievements. I don't take credit for it. And that has been more of a personal growth process for me that I've just absolutely loved and has really kind of kicked me out of that self-centeredness to the point where I don't really, you know, I'm self-centered about some things, but those are deeply personal things that, you know, are mine and mine alone. But yeah, don't mistake self-centeredness for narcissism. And,
you know, and don't mistake autism for narcissism or even egotism for narcissism.
Right.
Because aut means self, the root aut, A-U-T. And autistic people can seem very self-absorbed because they get in their attention tunnel or monotropism, but that's also not narcissism. Although you can have narcissistic, autistic people, but they're two separate things that just happen to intersect in that one person. But to the outside observer, it can all look like self-absorption, whether narcissistic, egoistic, autistic.
Yeah,
I mean, we're all self-absorbed to a way that just for survival, we have to take care of our own organism.
Right. Well, and I don't know much about autism, but I have a few friends that are autistic, including you, and it seems like autistic people need stability more than anything, and so they tend to self-stabilize. I don't know if that's something that you do or if you found it happens or occurs, but self-stabilization to me looks like Sometimes it's even an ability to change your mind. It can be reliant on outdated information as long as it makes you feel comfortable. I don't know if you do that. I don't think you do, but I have met some autistic individuals that's like no matter what evidence you confront them with, they will not change their mind.
Oh yeah, that
It's very
rigidity.
frustrating. Yeah, it's very
And
frustrating.
there's internal and external stabilization. Some need their environment stabilized, and if you change the external environment too much, then they get thrown off. And some of it's that internal where I think of it like a big ship cruise, like oil liner, oil tanker or something, trying to turn around. It's very hard to shift to another perspective or new information. Like the default that is so rigid that it takes a lot to change it or
Yeah.
turn it around to something else. So we'll maintain that inertia even in the face of reasons to be more agile.
Yeah.
I have that too,
You know,
especially with
you go back.
expectations. If
Yeah.
if I lock into a certain expectation or someone sets a certain expectation for me, and then something different than that happens, my brain keeps going back to that initial expectation and like demanding that it be met. And I have a hard time like kind of going with the flow
And then you can
and
move on.
adjusting to when expectations
Yeah.
change.
Yeah. Um, I've got a friend who, let's see if I can relay this without divulging personal information. They have a very, very difficult time thinking outside of their preconceived ideals and ideas. The hardest thing for them to do is to acknowledge that something else exists outside of their perceived reality. I don't know how to explain it better than that, but it's really difficult to change their minds about some things, especially when it comes to more liberal values. And it's just like you crap on conservatives all the time, and I'm not a conservative, but they'll crap on conservatives all the time. But it's like conservatives aren't wrong about everything. Like they're not wrong about everything. This is you don't have to be opposed to every single thing that group does just because they're conservatives. This is a person that uses the phrase "that's a conservative talking point" as a dismissal tactic. You don't get to use that. I'm sorry, that is not a valid argument. Just to identify something is not a valid way of disproving it.
Well, that's a rhetorical move that they're trying
It is
to
highly
like instead of
rhetorical. Yeah. So we bash it out every once in a while about certain things, and it's like I've got him in a couple of corners where he was like, "Okay, I'm gonna leave now," but he's very smart. They are very smart. Excuse me, they're very smart. They're a they them, so I gotta remember to honor that. But
I don't know what that is, but I mean,
yeah,
I kind of know what it is. Conceptually, I do know people that seem to exhibit both trait, like both at different times. But
yeah.
but visually, if they're in front of me, they're gonna generally look like one or the other. It's very rare I meet someone that's so androgynous that I can't tell what gender they are, and they actually look like a they them. And even then, I
Well,
wouldn't call them plural.
yeah, I think I'm not going to get into that right now. Yeah, some people it's very difficult, but for the most part, I've been around them long enough now, though. I can pretty much identify them when I see them. Some will fool
Like the
me,
gender.
but
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I am too.
yeah, gender fluid to me is the same thing as non-binary.
Which used to be androgyny. Like ever
Yeah.
since David Bowie in the 70s, that we've had androgyny, especially in the punk subcultures and the gay community part. So none of it's this new thing to me that needs all
Boy
of this.
George, for
Yeah.
Christ's sakes.
Yeah.
I mean, we grew up with
They're
this.
just rebranding a phenomena that's been with us my whole lifetime. And
Well,
before that, I'm sure.
I don't know if rebranding it's such a bad idea. More
Well, they're
specificity
rebranding
might
it
not
in
be a bad
a
thing.
very authoritarian way. Like now it's a social crime to not go along with their branding.
Oh, okay. So that's where you get the authoritarianism from. Okay.
Yeah, misgendering,
Um,
failing to use correct pronouns, all of that. Like
I can
it's
understand your
different than just
position
being
there.
androgynous or appearing androgynous or expressing yourself
Yeah.
androgynous. Now there's this whole etiquette that comes along with it that's demanded.
I've got a couple of friends who are non-binary, and they don't demand anything. They will inform you, "Hey, look, I'm non-binary. I would appreciate you using they them pronouns." But they
Do they
won't.
look like unless they look like I can't call someone a they if they look like a female or a male, no matter how androgynous they are. I can still tell the biological sex.
A lot of those
I don't know
things
what it
are
is.
socially imposed, and that's what they're comfortable with. But a lot of the times, the people that are going to tell you what their pronouns are, it's going to be in private. They're going to just tell you, like, "Hey, this is what I am." Right? Then you've got the very loud ones that are like they're virtue signaling, like, "This is what I am." They still might be that thing. I'm not going to say they're not or they are, but it's definitely an interesting rabbit hole to go down, and it can get difficult to deal with sometimes. Absolutely, and it's frustrating. But I think the benefit is that, and this is kind of where intuition kind of comes in. It's like my main intuition was that this is bullshit. Gender theory is bullshit. And so I went in the complete opposite direction. I started reading on it, and I started talking to a person who is who has their master's in behavioral forensic psychology, and a few other people. I've got a couple of friends that are PhDs, and I'm definitely confident that it's not bullshit. Although I'm not sure that all of it isn't. Does that make sense? Like 86 pronouns is probably too many for what we've got. So I would distinctly say there are definitely three for sure. And there's different spectrums on that. So yeah, well, I mean, yeah, three genders basically. And everybody don't conflate sex with gender. Those are two different things. But
What's
the
the
the,
third
the
gender?
gender, she, her, they, them, and he, him. Those are the
But
three
that's
that I
just the variation of the two existing genders.
Sure. Yeah.
Just like intersex.
There's no
is
way to
not
really describe that.
sex.
Well, intersex is a sex characteristic, right? We're talking about gender.
Right, but like I'm using it as an analogy. So even gender, there's not a third gender. There's only two. Because the gender is
right.
Is
But we have a name for it.
based
It's called intersex. Right. So we actually have a name for that middle ground. Well, we have a name for the gender middle ground, which is they.
But
them,
even
non-binary.
intersex, even the intersex, they appear as one sex or the other, phenomenologically. They're not a third form of human. They show
if
up.
you look at hermaphroditism, they share different characteristics of both sexes.
Yeah, but they're not. They're still like when you see them out in public, they're not. Like I said, it's very, very rare that someone looks so androgynous that I cannot tell which sex they are. And I still wouldn't call that a third sex. I would call it a perfect balance of the two, either sex as we're talking biologically, or gender if we're talking psychologically, which you can't see psychology anyway.
Right.
So all I have to go on is how they present to me.
Right. So what I mean by that is, like, I went in the complete opposite direction, and I discovered that I might not be right about my feelings, that it's bullshit. And so my automatic default is going to be a holding pattern. And that holding pattern can involve more research, more education, more involvement in those communities, so that I get a better feel for it. So I'm not saying that I believe or disbelieve either way. What I'm saying is I'm erring on the side of caution, because I am not going to be so arrogant as to say that this thing does not absolutely exist, because I know these people. They do exist.
Third gender.
Gender.
I think it exists psychologically.
Absolutely.
But that's nothing you can see. It's not concrete enough to base any kind of social demands or etiquette on. Like,
I get it, but I think this is one of those things that this is still a fairly new field to psychology, that we just don't have the research to back it up yet.
I will accept that somebody can be psychologically male or female or a combination of both or whatever, some blend
Yeah.
of the two. But when they communicate that to me, I can't see any of that inside their head. So it means nothing. There's no basis for me to react or take any significant action based on that information. I can't make a picture of what it is they're communicating from it.
Well, and that might just be a difference between you and I. I can accept that. You know what I mean? I can accept what they say.
I can accept it in the abstract, but I can't make any
Yeah.
useful meaning of it. They still look like a girl or boy or some androgynous person to me. I don't know what gender they are in their head at any given moment. Or I don't know what
They'll tell you.
percentage of male and female they look like to themselves. It's so
Well, some of them don't identify with either one of them. So it gets a little bit difficult. But honestly,
I don't know what that means at all. If someone tells me I'm not any gender, I know how to make less sense of that than if they told me they were.
Yeah. So my
bi-gender
position
or
is
the opposite
I
gender.
have no right and no business telling another grown adult how to explore their life, explore their sexuality, explore their gender. And so basically I meet people where they're at. I don't need to believe that you believe something. I'm just going to go based off of personal social etiquette. But
what does that mean? What does that require of you? I guess is what if someone said I'm no gender, what do you have to do in return? Like how do you have to what do you have to change or do differently? I don't know what not having a gender
at
even
most I have
means.
to learn new
What
pronouns.
do I have
really,
to do differently with this person?
Yeah. The worst that happens is I have to use they them instead of he her.
I'm not calling anybody.
That's the worst.
I'm not.
That's a personal choice to you. I mean, my personal choice is I will. So as you can tell, I'm not lambasting you. I'm not criticizing you. I'm not denigrating you for making that choice. I'm just simply saying that this is a choice that I have made, and your choice is a choice that you've made, and those are two perfectly acceptable positions to hold, so long as we don't discriminate against those lines. Does that make sense? Because my level is, or my level of justification is intolerance or violating the rights of another human being. Like once either one of those arguments crosses over that line, then I have a problem, right? Because the libertarian perspective really is that I shouldn't give a shit one way or another what you are, as long as you don't violate my personal rights or you don't violate the rights of others, then I shouldn't care. Right? You can't command me to call you something. I'm making the choice to follow that. So there's no rights that have been violated. So that's the policy that I follow.
I don't care, and I'm going to continue to not care, including not caring about what they want to be called.
Yeah, I mean that's fine for you, man. I'm not going to criticize you. I'm not going to try to guilt trip you either. That's not what I'm going to do. And I'm just explaining the path that I follow. You follow a different path. It's okay. Nothing wrong with that. You know what I mean? And disagreements are perfectly normal, valid, and can exist.
And my path is only based on my ability to conceptualize whatever it is they're asking of me. And if I can't conceptualize it, I'm not going to pretend to do it. It would be just an empty performative ritual to say they, but there would be no understanding of what the they is behind that, the meaning behind the they, because I don't know what a they is.
Sure. Well, let me ask you this question: Is understanding necessary? Is it always necessary?
Apparently, for me, it is. Otherwise, I'd be able to do it. If they said, call me.
That's all I was wondering. Yeah.
If they made up what are these neo pronouns like? Gender, queer, whatever. Call me Zir or Zer. I don't know what that is. Like, there's no way I'm gonna. I can say the words if I remember. It doesn't come naturally to me at all.
Yeah.
But there's no way there's going to be any meaning behind, like, any cognitive understanding of what I mean when I say that word.
Right.
So I wouldn't be able to do it authentically. I would be able to do it performatively, and I choose not to engage in empty performance. It's just an empty ritual.
Right. Well, the whole
and so to be authentic, to maintain my own authenticity, I'm not going to use Zizir without any understanding or meaning behind it.
Here's my thing. I haven't met anybody that goes by those pronouns. And if I did, chances are I would probably just disconnect from that person and not involve myself in their life, to be honest with you.
Yeah, that's usually what I do. If they have too many pronouns demands, I usually put them at the periphery.
Well, and I'm just saying that is to say there's a benefit for both parties involved here. One is I don't have to worry about maintaining that, and I don't have to worry about making sense of that. I don't have to engage you if I don't want to, right? The benefit for them is that they don't have to suffer the consequences of my own ignorance, right? So it's better that sometimes just two people go their own way, especially if they have two competing different ideologies or two different belief systems. I can walk into an environment where there's a whole shitload of Christians, and I can advocate for Christianity. I can advocate for religion, even though I myself am an atheist. I don't have that same faith-based system, right? But I can advocate for your right to be a Christian if you wanted to be a Christian. Does that make sense?
But I understand what Christian
that's human dignity right there. Yeah. But that's kind of what I'm talking about.
I don't know if I could advocate for like a Scientologist or some religion that I didn't know what it was.
No, I can advocate for your right to do what you want to do.
Yeah, that I can do. I'm not saying they can't be but I just don't want it to involve me. I don't want to have to depend on anything I do or not do. And I tell them up front, like they tell me their pronouns, I tell them I probably won't remember to call you that. I probably won't call you that. Or if their pronoun is she and they're he, I tell them I'll probably call you he because that's what you look like to me. I probably will not remember to call you she. So I set a very realistic expectation for them.
So let me ask you a question: do you believe that is a result of the autism that you carry? And
it might be.
Is that something that we're not talking about enough? Because it seems like there's a lot of autistic people that do identify as non-binary, but we don't talk about the ones that are autistic that don't follow those programs and don't have the ability to follow those programs.
I've been saying for years, I've made threads about this. I've probably made podcasts about it, that autistic people are going to get, this is more of a challenge for them than for neurotypicals, this new etiquette. And they're going to get caught on the short end of it because they're not going to be able to accommodate them. Because that's my whole point of today's discussion. There's a cognitive element to being able to authentically pull off this etiquette, in a genuine way. And without that understanding that comes with why you're calling this person Gigi or all that, it's harder. It's that ocean liner thing I was talking about. It's harder to turn that ocean liner just because someone's telling you to turn it. There's a cognitive process that if you understood it, it would be easier to adapt to this new etiquette. But they don't accept that. Because they're like, just use the words. It doesn't matter if you understand it or just use the words. So that's not going to work. But then even if you want that cognitive understanding, I haven't figured out how to get it. I still don't know what a Gigi. There's no way for me to understand what that is in their head, even if I wanted to understand.
So I can completely understand what you're saying right now, and I can get behind you on it, because it seems like to me, excuse me. Man, my throat. It seems to be there's a cognitive process between the ability to understand and to apply that understanding to the verbal word, right? Like you have an attachment to a word that is there for a reason, probably stability, right? Stability forming or stability formation, right? You need that stability. And that is something that our left-leaning compatriots are not talking about, and they're not giving credit to people that don't have the ability to do what they're doing, and they just think, oh, they're just transphobic, right? Or no, maybe there's something different here. Maybe there's something much deeper psychologically going on here, and you can't just throw people away like that. Like, I don't want you to be thrown away as a person. You know what I mean?
Well, I don't care if they throw me away.
Well, I know, but what I'm saying is that I don't want you thrown away simply because you don't fit their mold. Fuck that.
Yeah, but that is the life of a person like me, like just anybody, like
I know.
any kind of outlier or somebody that doesn't conform easily. That's the track our life takes. So it's gonna happen. I appreciate that you don't want it. I don't necessarily want it either. But
Yeah.
I've just adjusted to the reality that that's going to be the default norm.
Well, I think there's something to be said for compassionate understanding. You
Well, I
know,
think there is too, but like that's
and
not the
I
norm.
mean they need to have compassionate understanding towards people that don't get it like you do. Does that make sense?
Well, they want this. They need to be able to give the same thing that they're asking for themselves, and that's where I find the stumbling block
They're
for them,
hypocritical.
because they want the compassion understanding, but they're not able to give the compassion understanding.
Yeah. Yeah, I have noticed many of them are very hypocritical about their positions.
I don't know, Pixel. I know I can only speak for me in my case, but yes, I'd say in a sense, look, there's no one answer to autism at all, because you have a lot of autistic people that get really autistic about the etiquette and the pronouns and can internalize it to like a very rigid OCD level and then execute it like a computer program. Like some autistic
Yeah.
people are even better at this than normal people. So this is not all autistic people. It's definitely me. I have to understand what I'm saying. Like if I'm going to say something, I have to understand why I'm saying it. It has to come from I can't just parrot back words, because when I put my words together, I'm putting them together intentionally
Yeah.
to make
Well,
some kind of meaning.
I think that this is a good opportunity to mention Wittgenstein. The
Yes, I was about. Oh, good. I was
the
on
20th
my
century
way.
philosopher.
Words, language is intersubjective. You can't impose language from without. It's negotiated intersubjectively. And until you can convince people to adopt the meaning of the word you're trying, then you can't demand or expect them of it just because you want them to do it. That's not how language works. And
Yeah.
it works in, like I said, the language categories and family resemblance. And I have no problem with trans women or women in some contexts, in some language games, even though my brain necessarily can't flip to that game or see them in that context. I have no problem that in some contexts, trans women are women, and in some contexts or some language games or some categories they're not, because they don't.
Right.
It depends on how the word is used.
So this is kind of the vein that I wanted to go down, because this is a very interesting aspect of language that I found like absolutely phenomenally expansive that Wittgenstein actually came up with. And to the viewers, we'll just use an example. So if I'm going to try and explain what a red apple is to Jeff, there's a lot of processes that have to go into that. First and foremost, we have to be able to agree on what an apple is. And I'm going to probably Jordan Peterson the shit out of this, so just bear with me. But to say a red apple doesn't mean anything to say Jeff, right? Okay, what shade is it? How large is it? What what tree did it come off of? What does the skin look like? What does the texture feel like? What does the meat feel like? What does it taste like? Is it salty, sugary, sour? Is it tart? Is it a green apple? Like, is it a green apple flavor? Right. So the whole process of language interpretation, definitions are really good for very broad strokes, right? You can be like, this is generally conceived of as this thing. So red is a general concept, but there's hundreds of different shades of red, including pink. You know what I mean? So when we're sitting down and we're trying to agree on terms, Jeff on the side, if I'm trying to explain what my red apple looks like in my brain, Jeff has to latch onto each one of those terms and associate it with something that he is aware of, right? So the first one is an apple. Do you know what an apple is? Yes. Cool. Let's move on from there. Do you know what a red apple is? Yeah, sure, but I don't know what hue that apple is. What color of red is that apple? Is it a dark red, a light red? What? Right? So you're constantly, as language progresses, you're making agreements on what both of you see as a picture in your head, because Wittgenstein argued that we don't actually speak in words, we speak in concepts, We understand words as concepts. So when we're speaking, we're actually manufacturing an image in our brain of what that concept of that word really means. And that might be where that disconnect for Jeff is he might not have the ability to connect those two, or even more importantly, disconnect between those two approaches.
I don't have a concept of a gender outside of masculine or feminine. I don't have a concept of gender. I don't have a concept of non-binary. Although I have a little, I can mix male and female together and kind of get an idea of what non-binary might be. I don't have a concept of all of these neogenders. So when someone tells them to me, it's like you trying to describe the apple without me having the appropriate references in my database. I don't know what that is. I have male and female and all of that other stuff abstracted from our experiences of males as a sex or females as a sex. And then gender expression is built off of biological sex. So those are my starting points. And I don't know how you get to gender from just my experience of human males and females and their varying gender expressions. That doesn't lead me to this third concept.
If I had to peg something on something, it's almost like anything, those neo pronouns, it's almost like self-aggrandizing, self-centered narcissism, because you're going out of your way to make it complicated for everybody just for you and your comfort.
Yeah.
So everybody else has to be uncomfortable so that you can be comfortable.
Yeah.
Rather than, let's say, making a compromise. I just
tell them no.
Just go by they them. I mean, that's a reasonable compromise if you can get behind it. But I don't want to dismiss those individuals that identify that way, because I don't have the tools capable of doing that. But I do have a lack of tools to be able to say I'm not going to interact with that person for multiple different reasons. One is their benefit, one is mine. You know what I mean? So, but in some cases, it almost does feel like performativity, empty performativity that is very self-centered. So yeah. God, there was another one. What was it? It was I can't remember the name of it. Never mind. But yeah, it's an interesting avenue of discussion there, Jeff. Yeah, like when I told Paul I'm a very hard left-leaning libertarian, I fucking meant it. Look, I'm not gonna lie. I'm gonna be consistent as much as I possibly can, and I know I'm left-leaning, and I know that some of my views are difficult for other people to get.
That doesn't really. I'm surprised we don't clash more than we do, because that really doesn't come out in our discussions. You seem very reasonable almost in every discussion.
I appreciate that. I think having some moral flexibility goes a long way. I think also understanding, compassion, empathy go a long way for difficult conversations. And I think that's a nuance that we have lost as a society. Is like we constantly feel like we have to be at battle with the other person. And my position is no, I fucking don't. Like, to me, my responsibility as a human being is to make other people's lives better because I'm in it. That is my life goal, is to make other people's lives better because I was here. Right? I can't do that if I'm oppositional every fucking time I talk to someone who has different beliefs than I do. So my principal mode of operation is like, I want to understand you. It does not require my agreement to do that. What it does require of me is to have an open mind, an open heart, and at least some conceptual understanding of what you're going through or where you're coming from. And I think that's why we don't really have really, really complicated, difficult conversations. We get caught in the weeds of words sometimes, but I've never felt like there's been like some, disagreement.
So because of all the extra work you're doing on your end. I didn't even know you were a libertarian until today. So, because usually I argue with those too. I'm supposed to be doing that. I'm supposed to be working on that listening to understand and listening with the heart. And
Yeah.
I guess when it comes to the gender issue, not necessarily the trans issue, but the all the other genders, my mind is not as open as I think I aspire it to be. And I don't know if it ever will be when it comes to that. It seems pretty made up, but I think I should approach it more with your attitude of listening to understand. I just forgot to do
Yeah.
it today.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
it's something that you
Hey,
have to train
Samo,
yourself
I didn't
to
know
do.
that was you. Pixels, yeah, we've been going for like 3 hours. I can end it too, but he's thanks for the stream. Good night from the UK, and he's somebody from the Paul's Discord that I recognize. I didn't know that was him or her. So yeah, good to see you. Thanks for the questions and the comments and the
Yeah.
discussion.
So, something that Pixel Sure said just a second ago that I'm reading now is the perspective. I don't know what that is supposed to say. I don't know if that's a typo, but the perspective gives so much weight to gender while also paradoxically trying to escape the concept. So, yeah, yep, that is something that needs to be fleshed out. I would highly recommend you flesh that out on your own and see what you can find. But that is definitely something the left, the more, I would say the more neo-progressive left, I like to call them, not postmodernists necessarily, because most of them don't know what the fuck that means. So I generally tend to call them neo-progressives. They don't know how to have conflicting arguments. They don't know how to right themselves when faced with a conflicting idea. And this is something that I have been extremely critical of my friends. And I've been like, we need to change this. We need to be able to have difficult conversations. We need to be able to face these things head on. This is why we're losing in almost every single state where anti-trans bills are being legislated. It's because we fucking suck at arguing. And we even more greatly suck at listening. You know what I mean? And it's just like, guys, we got to do better, because this is not how this is supposed to function. A liberal society like ours should be having awesome discourse and
it doesn't mean free of
investigating these
conflict.
things as a society. Right? No, conflict is
but it
perfectly
does
normal
mean
to have.
I think I have some of that too. That inability to. I have a lot of defensiveness, and when I hear ideas that threaten my values, that defensiveness flares up in me, and it distorts or impedes my ability to listen in a more open, liberal way.
Seriously.
So
I got into a
conflict is
conversation.
fine if your ideas clash and disagree and whatever, but it's that initial, that's different from the kind of reactivity that makes conversation difficult.
Right. I had a conversation with someone and I lost my shit on him because most libertarians are morons. They don't read the literature. They don't even know where libertarian came from. They don't know who coined the phrase. They don't know any of the books, the authors. They've never read John Locke, Adam Smith, David Bowes. They just have not done any of the fucking work. Usually it's Republicans who want to smoke weed and Democrats who want to own guns. And I got into an argument with someone, a libertarian, who said that the Libertarian Party has never supported trans people. And I was like, where the fuck did you get that idea? That is about as antithetical to libertarianism. You can't get further from that to libertarianism. Libertarian, like in a nutshell, you can basically say libertarian means don't fuck with me, I don't fuck with you, small government, fiscal responsibility for the government, and that's fucking it. Like, don't violate the rights of others. Like, if you were to crack it down into that nutshell, that's what it is, right? So to tell me that the Libertarian Party, which I have been a member of for over 20 years now, does not support LGBTQ people is blatantly fucking idiotic. And I lost my temper on this person. And it was the first time I ever got banned from Facebook. It was because of this person. Yeah.
Are you still banned?
I went ham on this asshole. And I did not regret it. I did not regret it one single bit. However, what I do regret is not being more intelligent about how I approach that conversation. because I should have asked more why questions instead of making more statements. Why questions are really good for finding out the intent of people, finding out why they have the beliefs that they do. I mean, listen to Peter Boghossian, street epistemology, right? That's a core tenet of street epistemology is don't make statements, ask questions. Let them investigate their own thoughts, challenge their thoughts, and then let them come to a conclusion. And that's how you change people's minds. You don't actually change it. They change it for themselves. That's the whole process of street epistemology, which I highly recommend people check out. It will definitely make your life better learning how to communicate better. So yeah,
you make a good point because I was talking about when you hear something that clashes with your values, and this probably ties into it. I would call that stupidity or ignorance, this guy's position. But if one of your values is truth or intelligence, then that would be a value it clashes with. Because I have the same problem. I have a hard time with stupidity or ignorance in a conversation, and I can have the same reaction to that as well.
Yeah. Incompetence and excuse me, incompetence and inconsiderateness are two of my my triggers.
Considerateness is so
my temper.
Subjective.
Yeah, but those are the two biggest triggers to getting me to lose my temper. And I guarantee you, someone's watching this and they're going to bring it up and they're going to try and use it against me sometime. Because it's something that I'm very open about. Like, if you want to be on my bad side and get me really motivated to say some stupid shit, all you got to do is piss me off by saying very, very rude things about people you don't know anything about. You know what I mean? And telling me that, certain people are not human beings just because you think they're not. That is, and at no point in time during this conversation have you ever said anything that would make me believe that you don't think that trans people are trans, right? You're just explaining why you have a difficulty with concepts, right? Concept translation.
Yeah, with the etiquette that's demanded of me and the social consequences that come from not being able to meet that etiquette, which is that's a normal
you never
situation.
said that they don't,
it's
or
just
shouldn't
a
exist.
particularly heightened situation in this context. But no, I don't believe that. I don't not believe that trans people are human beings, and I don't not believe that trans is an actual thing. In some people, I think it's more rare than it appears currently.
Yeah.
But I still think I still acknowledge that it's a real condition.
Well, and
ultimately, it's all ego and defensiveness. Like when we're having conversations and defensiveness gets triggered, it's ego defense.
Yeah. Well, and that's something that people need to learn to deal with, and why, in my personal opinion, ego death is so important to personal growth. Like you kind of got to kill certain aspects of yourself to grow. Like
Have you done it? Have you been able to do ego death?
I think I've done it fairly successful. I think there's some residual there. I think you can't.
Yeah, you're always gonna have an ego because you need it to survive.
Right. Well, you can't stain a soul for 40 years and then just expect it to come out with the wash. That's not very, very reasonable to a position to take. So yeah, sure. I retain, I would probably say I retain more ego than I'd probably be likely to admit. But also in the process of killing certain portions of that ego inside myself, I've came to really amazing enlightened positions on things where I am really, really happy with where I'm at. And it's okay to challenge me, and it's okay for me to be wrong. And I'm okay with all of those positions. And that took a lot of work. That took years and years and years of work. But it's so much more beneficial to me. I am so much happier with my life. I am so much happier with the interactions that I have with people. I'm happy with the interactions I have with you. I'm happy with the interactions that I had with Paul. I'm happy with the interactions I've had with Charles Zickakotu, with critical African thinkers, right? Like, I just love the fact that I can go into a conversation and I can be okay with being wrong.
Well, next time we talk, I want to hear about some of the steps you took. Like, I want to get to that ego death, or maybe next time we're at a group.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, I'm aware that you've been going on for 3 hours, man. You're a soldier, dude. Fucking killing it.
I'm really loving it. I could go hours more, but I need I'm gonna Machine Lies is streaming later, so I'm gonna show up on his. So I'm gonna take a little break to recharge and feed myself and stuff like that.
And
But streaming
what
really
does he
does
do?
get addictive. I see how these
Yeah.
people go for 5-10 hours.
Yeah. There's a guy named Born Rich who he's had some that last 24 hours. I don't know how he does it, to be honest with you. But what channel does who did you say had a streaming? They were going to
Machine
do a stream
Lies,
later.
the guy that was in
Machine
here earlier.
Lies.
Yeah.
What does he cover on his channel?
He's an
Or their channel? I
he's
don't
an
even know what
interesting
channel it is.
character.
That's a hell of a way to lead into a description.
Because he tries to cover topics, but then the conversations never go in the direction he starts out intending them. But he has a lot of very interesting people that show up on his feed. They're kind of, he has a background in philosophy, and they look at like maybe technology and the effects that it's having on the modern world, on the individual, but kind of from a more conspiracist like point of view. So you get a lot of like maybe fringe thought that you wouldn't see the other. I watch him for just the personalities that show up. I was on it last weekend. I was on it for 4 hours, and I was on it kind of like trying to educate about Satanism, and this guy jumped on and just yelled at me and harassed me for like the whole 4 hours and just hijacked the conversation, made it impossible for everyone else to talk, and just kept making an ass of himself. And this went on for 4 hours. So it's that kind of, it's really Thunderdome.
Yeah, I would just peace out. That's not worth my time. I got better shit to do. I can go snuggle with my wife and watch a movie.
I did eventually, but it took me 4 hours to realize that, you should peace out.
You got to be a little bit quicker on that trigger.
And then he went on for 6 more hours. So at 4 hours, the light bulb went off, and I said, I just realized that the whole rest of the night is probably going to be like this, and I'm not interested in this kind of conversation anymore. But it took me 4 hours to realize that.
Yeah. I've had conversations with people like that, and it's just like, you know what? It's no longer worth my time. I want to have intelligent conversations where we can complete our thoughts and complete our sentences, and then challenge one another. Like, the only reason why you're going to interrupt me is because you know you don't have a fucking point, and you know I'm going to fucking destroy you right now. You know what I mean? Like, generally, that's the only reason that I've ever seen someone completely obtrusively interject themselves into my sentence or my thoughts. And
I do it sometimes because to not lose my own tree. Like, if I let a conversation go too far, then
right. But you don't do it rudely. You don't do it rudely. And what I mean by that is there's people that will intentionally just talk over you the whole time you're trying to speak, right? Yeah. And they're just saying gibberish, or they'll repeat themselves over and over and over and over and over again, right? You can tell when someone is doing that. They're doing it from a place of insecurity about their own position. You are threatening the position that they hold, and you risk embarrassing them. And so I don't fuck with those people. Like, if that's the kind of person that you are, again, I have way better shit to do with my time than to sit here and talk to some, ego-driven individual who just can't get past their own fucking head. Like, I don't have the patience for it. I want intelligent, intellectual, deep conversations where we can really kind of ride that tide between, rationality, intuition, reason, logos, pathos, and ethos, and just really just have a killer ass time doing that shit. So those are the kind of conversations I'm really going to try and focus on being more present for, rather than like the Crucible. They are incredibly adversarial, and I'm not a fan of that system.
It's a lot of although when Andrew makes some good points, like when he's right about something and knows his stuff, he really does make some good points. And then there's time. I agree with you. I think he's a good person. I think his logic is not as tight as it could be. So when he has these logical lapses, but then when he does it, he's a really good. Like, I find myself agreeing with him.
So part of the video that I watched him in with Paul P.F. Young, the parts that I hated
that was
the
one
most
from like
were the
week or so ago.
Yeah. About abortion. The toughest part about that conversation is when he stopped communicating and started posturing. That's when the
That's when
arrogance came
Paul
out.
said, "Oh, it's going to go into debate mode now. This is what we're going to do. We're going to debate."
Yeah.
Because instead, it
Well,
was,
debate's
and I
fine.
noticed that stream when Andrew left and signed off, the conversation got much more constructive and took a completely different turn, and people were able to talk and listen. And it was Andrew's style of communicating that was keeping that from happening while he was on the call.
Right. And that's frustrating. And because I want to hear what he says. I want to understand how he thinks and what he believes so that either I can understand or I can possibly try to convince him that there might be another way. But I can't do that until I understand him. But it
Yeah.
makes it really difficult when people are either inconsistent with their argument or when challenged, they remain so consistent that you know that they understand exactly what's going on, but they just refuse to give a foot to their
Well, they
position.
go into
They don't
defense
wanna
mode
lose.
that we were talking
Right.
about, and
Rather
that
than
happens with.
my position is I want to go into a conversation. I want to be proven wrong. So if you can out argue me, awesome. I am on board with that. And he doesn't have that position. And again, I guarantee he's probably a good person. He's probably a very moral person. And I think that's an amazing
I think
feature, an amazing trait. And I implore him to continue following that path. But I would also implore him to humble himself a little bit. And maybe you might figure out better ways of strengthening your own arguments if you listen to other people's arguments. You know,
that's what I told him
something.
when I first met him too. But I'm not
Yeah.
any better at it than he is because I have some of the same thing.
Yeah. I
It's
mean,
ego.
if I want to
It's
beat someone's
defensive.
argument, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, like, if I am actually intent on beating somebody's argument, I'm going to learn their argument better than they know it themselves. Because it's the only way that you're actually going to compete in that marketplace. Right? I can't come in shorthanded. Otherwise, it's never going to work. Right?
I will say this: sometimes in that process of learning the other person's argument, the passions get raised.
That's something that I had to learn to deal with too. As long as they're not being assholes and being like, "But you believe this," right? Chill your shit, bud, and just focus on your argument. You know, and it's just, you know, some people are so aggressive because they have to be right when really you can learn a lot more about your position and its weaknesses if you listen to criticism, if you listen to critique, and you really take that in, and then you can start diagnosing where you're wrong, and you might end up at the same place that you were at before, but now your argument is even stronger. He loses that nuance, and I would ask him to try and do that.
You guys should chat. You should do a stream with him one day. Because I noticed with him, a lot of it goes off of personality too. Like if he likes your personality, he's a lot more rational and stable. And there's something about you like me that he's reacting to, then he gets into that combative mode.
I just hope he hasn't had the perception that I'm talking shit on him. I hope he doesn't think I'm talking shit on him.
He can handle it. He talks shit on everybody else. He has entire trash talk episodes where he finds people on the internet and reviews their videos and talks trash on them. So
that's funny. I'd like to see some of those. But yeah. But
well,
anyways,
Steve,
man, I'll let you get going.
Yeah, you've been very inspiring. I think I'm guilty of a lot of what you've talked about and a lot of what you've spotted in Andrew. But you do inspire me to, like, you're at least a model for a different way if I decide to try that.
I appreciate that.
So thank you for that. I am trying to get better at it. It's really hard to take criticism. It really is hard to be challenged when there's so much at stake.
Yeah.
When those views or those values get challenged. And
well, I hope you didn't take anything I said as a criticism.
Not
anything
really.
I said was really meant to be
nothing
constructive.
That stands out as criticism.
Yeah.
I certainly didn't take anything personally.
Fantastic. But you know, I always enjoy talking to you because we always have really great conversations. Even if we vehemently disagree with a certain thing, we still have really great productive conversations, and I think those are something that need to happen more frequently within society. And so I have enjoyed our friendship, and I've enjoyed our conversations. So
well, me too, likewise. And I'm gonna do more streaming, so you have a standing invitation anytime. Drop by, and I still have the Monday thing, so maybe I'll see you there.
Yeah, I appreciate that, dude. I really do.
And have a good rest of your weekend.
See you, man.
Okay, peace, brother. Okay. Wow. Okay, see, it's getting there. This is my third day streaming. I'm already at 3 hours and 15 minutes. I've had guests. I've had all kind of shit going on today. I had a bunch of stuff to share. Some Twitter tweets, whatever. What are they called now? X's. I'm just calling them tweets. And I want to talk more about the Destiny video and all that other topic. But this is great. This is exactly what I was hoping to happen with this platform. So thank you, Steve. Thank you, Trad. Thank you, Machine, Pixel, everybody else that participated. This has made my whole weekend. I don't know if I'll stream tomorrow because I have a pretty full day. We are doing book club tomorrow at 2 p.m. if you want to join for that. We're doing Emerson's American Scholar essay, which you can find online. So just shoot me a link if you want to come for that discussion. It's primalhex, primalhex @gmail.com. And if I don't do it tomorrow, which probably won't, I will definitely be on for Monday. So catch me then and come and let's learn how to have more productive conversations with each other. Okay, have a good weekend, everybody. Oh, hang on. Let me get the music going. I'm in a rock mood, so let's rock out.